בחרמון נמס השלג בחצי הלילה, בחרמון זורם לו פלג בחצי הליל. אבא שם על הר השלג בחצי הלילה, שר שירים על נס בפלא עם כל ישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. בבקעת תמר פורח בחצי הלילה, הירח שם זורח בחצי הליל. שם אחי ודאי שומע בחצי הלילה את שירנו השמח כאן בישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. במדבר הולך החושך בחצי הלילה, שקט הס בארץ גושן בחצי הליל. לדודי עיני נחושת בחצי הלילה, וגם הוא חוגג כמו שכל בית ישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. ואני יושב בבית בחצי הלילה, עם נרות וגביע יין בחצי הליל, וכוכב מאיר עיניים בחצי הלילה, לי מוסר ברכת שמיים ולכל ישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. שוב צוהל.
Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння, різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар.
Future sun.
Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 998 of the news. And it's good to see you all once again. And today we got the very big news everybody's been waiting for. The U.S. has granted permission for Ukraine to do deep strikes into Russia using U.S. weapons in a massive bombshell piece of news. And also, North Korea is also thinking about even sending more troops to Russia in another bad piece of news. So it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of news from around the world. But most importantly today, we are going to be covering the massive news that has come out of Ukraine and the United States today, as our amazing republic has finally given permission by orders of the Office of the President of the United States for the Ukrainian armed forces to be able to use American long-range missiles to strike into the Russian Federation. Regardless where the Russians may be or where they may hide, American weaponry and Western military might will be able to save the day and finally see that the Russian Federation's supply depots, command posts, and logistics hubs are all under the reach of American and Western weaponry, as well as the Ukrainian armed forces as a whole. It is a major success today as far as the situation in Ukraine is concerned, and the Russians are already going into a complete meltdown over the situation, with many saying, the Russian mill bloggers being the one to spearhead these comments, that they may as well have already lost some major fronts of the conflict, because Ukrainians will now be able to decisively and strategically destroy the main logistics hubs that keep most of the Russians' frontline situations somewhat tenable. That is the biggest news that we have heard at this phase of the war, and that is coming as the first snowfall is arriving in Ukraine, and the winter fighting is to truly begin. That also comes at the exact same time as we were able to hear news that the North Koreans are going to possibly be considering sending around 100,000 North Korean soldiers to fight on the side of the Russian Federation in the Ukraine war. And we also heard today that according to U.S. statements, the main reason why the long-range strike approval was given was because of the North Korean involvement in the war. We can also hear the exact same time that inside of Israel, we were able to see that one of the Iron Dome systems failed today as it was attempting to intercept a Houthi missile fired from the southern side of the Arabian Peninsula, but nevertheless, we were able to hear that that missile was successfully intercepted. The Russian Federation has also been trying to lash out in anger immediately due to the massive statements that were made just a moment ago from the United States of America. And we were able to see that one of the largest drone and missile attacks of the entire war was conducted overnight, and while Ukrainian air defense was working incredibly hard to shoot down and intercept every single air target over their country, it does appear that some hits were made, including a missile slamming into the Kremenchuk hydro power plant, although the power plant has not been breached and the reservoir further north is still intact, although the dam has been slightly damaged by the missile impact. Nevertheless, we were also able to see that Ukrainian forces were able to pull off what can only be called as another day of miracles inside the Kursk Oblast. With the entire weight of 50,000 Russian soldiers bearing down on this front, the Ukrainian forces have been successfully able to hold their front lines for another day without hardly moving their front lines at all and inflicting incredibly high losses onto the Russian attacking forces from what we were able to see today. Not only that, we were able to see that around other areas, the Ukrainians have been doing quite well on the defensive in these directions, as we were able to see in the Kupiansk direction that a decent amount of Russian losses were taken today as they are attempting to push further down the road from Vilshana and towards the city of Kupiansk. We were also able to see some defensive actions happening around Terny and Torske inside of the Seberonsky Forest, as well as defensive actions happening in Toretsk and Pokrovsk as well. We were also able to get some additional information, some more in-depth details and analysis of what was going on during last night's drone and missile attack, and we're also seeing that the Russians are beginning to try and conduct more advanced deception tactics during these attacks for the large part by using some decoy drones mixed in with the real drones to be able to try and take up more of Ukraine's interceptors and leave a bit more of an open window for their drones and missiles to actually make it to their target. We have loads and loads of news today. Today is probably...
Also, Enforcer, you know something else I got to go ahead and shout out right now. We're already up to $1,151 raised of the fundraiser, and of course, it is the Sunday night fundraiser stream, and we are once again fundraising for Nova Ukraine, a really good charity that helps the people on the ground inside of Ukraine. We fundraised a ton for them recently, and they've been a great charity, helping out a ton in Ukraine, so be sure to donate if you can. The thing's already going super fast. We're already 1/3 of the way there to reaching that $3,000 goal, and it's crazy to see.
And it is absolutely crazy to see. And of course, we have a $3,000 fundraiser goal tonight for Nova Ukraine, which is an amazing nonprofit that has been helping out tremendously on the ground on the humanitarian side of things. And not only that, does help out the soldiers of Ukraine as well, and helps them to be able to secure an education after the war to be able to provide for their families. Probably one of the most interesting things that they do, but beyond that, they help out families that have had to escape active war zones, among many other things, and any support that y'all give to this fundraiser tonight will go directly to Nova Ukraine and will help them out in their war effort against the Russian Federation, because it frees up Ukrainian government resources from the rear line, focusing on the civilian aspect, and allows them to focus more of their efforts and attention onto the front line directly, helping them to once again push home, hopefully, this victory that we'll be seeing here in the future, but still, we'll be waiting to see how that it actually turns out. But nevertheless, at the moment, it appears that things have been going in an incredibly bad way for the Russian Federation over just the past day, as we were able to hear that a statement was made today that the office of the President of the United States is going to be allowing for long-range missile strikes to be conducted into the Russian Federation. If Twitter loads, it appears that Twitter is a little cranky tonight. That is perfectly fine. We will wait. And if I click...
I sure hope it's not having the problem it was having earlier, because mine would not load whatsoever on, I believe it was Safari, and I jumped on Chrome, and then it worked, and then it stopped working on a Chrome, and I jumped back on Safari, and then it worked again.
So let's see here. It appears that Twitter is having some server issues, but nevertheless, of course, hopefully this fixes itself, or if y'all want to see these clips for yourselves, and for some reason Twitter is working for you, it doesn't appear to be working for me, you can click on the very last link in our description below this stream, and you can go and click on the map yourself and read this verbatim. But to largely summarize the news that we were able to get today from the Office of the President of the United States, we were able to hear that they finally have given authorization for the state of Ukraine to use any and all weaponry that had been provided by the United States of America throughout the course of the past 3 years to be able to strike deep inside the Russian Federation at any target that they wish. We have not heard this publicly, but we do assume that the Moscow area, and specifically government buildings in Moscow, are most likely off limits, as that would probably be too large of an escalation to risk, considering that would have been American, some American involvement in directly striking Russian government buildings. So we feel that those are off the table. But beyond that, every single other target inside of Russia, around 300 miles deep from the Ukrainian border, is a target. And just to give y'all a little bit of an idea of how big of a target area this is, let me show y'all 300 miles from a safe firing zone inside of Ukraine. That is about 300 miles, so they can literally, quite truly, pretty much fire into the dead center of Moscow from a safe firing zone. They can fire about as far north as Veliki Luki, in just north of the Smolensk Oblast. They are also able to fire about as far in as Lipetsk, Voronezh, and if we were to see that these ATACMS were being fired from a more southerly area of Ukraine, they would be able to strike all the way down practically past Novorossiysk, putting the Russian Black Sea Fleet once again in jeopardy of being stricken and destroyed. They are able to strike the city of Krasnodar. They were able to strike directly at the Russian Southern Military District's headquarters at Rostov-on-Don. They are able to even get within spitting distance of Volgograd with a long-range launch from an ATACMS missile. But what is even more impressive than this is that the British and the French also joined in today as well, and both stated that their Scalp EG and Storm Shadow missiles can also be used for deep strikes into the Russian Federation, meaning that there is an additional 20 to 30 mile window that the Ukrainians have in extended range capabilities, because the Storm Shadow and the Scalp EG are able to hit just around 20 or 30 miles farther in range than an ATACMS missile, meaning that pretty much every single major military site, every single strategic location that the Russian Federation is using inside of their country is a viable and strategic target within the area of about 300 miles to 320 miles away from the Ukrainian border. This is going to be changing the war massively, and it already appears that the Russian Federation is going into an unmitigated panic mode, as we were able to hear, and hopefully this loads from Twitter, I'm hoping, and it appears that Twitter is having a bit of a server issue at the moment. Luckily, I know the news that we're covering beforehand because I look at it and read it a little bit, so, oh, wait a minute. Oh, hold up, wait a minute, we might actually have some luck here. Hold up.
Man, it might save the day. Let's see. It's been having server issues all day, so if it works, that's a miracle. Let's see. Also, one other thing, Enforcer, you might try is you might drag this off the screen and also clear your cookies out real quick. That might also help as well. But, oh, look at that. It's a miracle. It's a Christmas miracle.
It's a Christmas miracle, but beyond that, this is a statement today from a Russian military blogger. I also want to make this quite clear because I know someone's about to come in, because some people are truly geniuses and they're about to say this is in English, therefore this isn't real. And this is the original post that was made by the Russian military blogger in Russian, but considering that we are all from the western part of the world, or the western sphere, and considering that none of us really effectively speak Russian, and also on top of that, around 95 to 98% of the audience would not be able to understand me if I read or spoke Russian. For this reason, we use the English translation. And so, moving on into the English translation, let's hear what this specific Russian military blogger has had to say today. And I also want to make this quite clear. This Russian military blogger right here, Roman Saponskov, has a pretty decent history of being a very pro-Russian person who also makes these sort of interesting kinds of statements that the Russian Federation is truly unbeatable and invincible. Just to put that out there, this guy has a little bit of a history of saying things like that. So here's what he had to say on the matter today. And don't believe people who claim that deep strikes are insignificant. Every escalation involving American and Western precision weapons has caused us significant problems. And then he goes through and lists the times that it actually caused him significant problems. So let's go down memory lane with Roman here, and let's see what he says caused him significant problems, shall we? HIMARS, summer of 2022. Frontline warehouses, command posts, and logistics hubs within its range were decimated. This was also called the summer pogrom by the Russians, because literally every single ammunition depot that they were using at the time was pretty much destroyed, and so they had to completely restructure their supply lines, and we do believe that's what largely cost them the Balaklia counteroffensive and the Kherson counteroffensive, is because the supply lines were practically non-existent and being entirely restructured from the ground up during that time. time. This changed the course of the war and, without exaggeration, marked the first major turning point. Logistics became stretched thin, and using artillery, especially towed systems, became much harder. A lot of ammunition depots were destroyed, triggering the 2022 shell shortage, which we also documented on our side, on the pro-Ukrainian side on the channel. And this was achieved with only a couple of dozen launchers deployed across the entire front. Then came 2023 and the arrival of the Storm Shadow and the Scalp EG missiles, and these essentially crippled the Black Sea Fleet, which we also saw here on this channel when that happened. While not everything was sunk, a significant portion of the fleet had to withdraw from Crimea, moving to Novorossiysk, making it impossible to operate there freely. I also want to remind y'all that the Scalp EG and Storm Shadow missiles did cause an incredibly serious amount of damage to the Russian Black Sea Fleet. It destroyed an entire Rostov-on-Don class submarine, destroyed every single Rapucha class landing ship that was in service at the time. I believe one of them has been knocked out but is still being repaired, so technically still in service and not stricken off the record yet, but still in very bad shape. Another thing that happened because of these strikes is that the entire Black Sea Fleet then found out that Sevastopol, which has been their home historically for hundreds of years, is a complete hellhole. It's entirely unsafe, and there's really no way to keep any ship moored in this harbor in a good floating condition. So then they had to take all of the combat portions of the Black Sea Fleet that were in Sevastopol, and they shipped them out over here to Novorossiysk on the Russian coastline within this area of Vostochny Rayon. This is actually a fairly modern satellite picture. Not the most modern that we've seen so far, but you can see that a decent amount of the service fleet had already been moved at this point to Vostochny Rayon, including several of the Kilo-class submarines that are also in this area as well. You can actually see 3 of them in the harbor out of the 4 that are still operational and have not been destroyed. So we do know that when this satellite picture was taken, just to clarify what that means, one of them was underway while this picture was being taken, because we do not see it at Vostochny Rayon, and it would not be at Sevastopol due to the great risk it would pose just being inside the harbor. But nevertheless, that was also a major issue that the Russians faced. And while the Black Sea Fleet has not at all been effective throughout the entire war on blockading the Ukrainian port of Odessa and stopping any commercial shipments of grains or any other products from leaving Ukraine, and while the Ukrainian Navy doesn't even exist to be threatened by the Black Sea Fleet allowed a massive additional ability for the Russians to be able to fire missiles into Ukraine from a different attack vector, usually from the area inside of the western area, the western direction of the Black Sea, allowing them to target places such as Ivano-Frankivsk, Ternopil, Lviv, and Odessa with a much shorter flight time, and not only that, with an entirely different angle where the Ukrainians would have to set up air defense, which in some instances was being stretched thin at that point. With the destruction of the Black Sea Fleet and the removal from Sevastopol, the missile attacks from the western area of the Black Sea pretty much stopped, meaning that the Ukrainians were able to start reprioritizing and shifting their air defense priorities further east and into the areas of the country where most of the attacks were coming from at that point, greatly strengthening Ukrainian air defenses at the time, and also greatly decreasing the effectiveness of Russian air attacks into Ukraine during that period. And then, last but not least, was the arrival of the ATACMS missiles with cluster munitions, which were also provided in 2023 as well. Airfields, even as far as Crimea, were hit incredibly hard, according to the Mill blogger. Even on their side, they were able to document that. The Bryansk airfield alone is a prime example. These strikes caused severe damage, destroyed a lot of equipment on the ground, and inflicted significant human losses. They imposed serious limitations on the operations of the Army Aviation and the aerospace forces in Crimea. The hunt for air defenses falls into the same category, and many people will remember this as well, as we did report on this back in the day. Crimea is pretty much uninhabited at this point by the Russian armed forces. Most of it has moved out that was at all usable. We were able to see that in some particular instances, just to remind you all here, the airfield at Dzhankoy, Saki, and Vyatsky, as well as the airfield just north of Sevastopol called Belbek Airfield, were practically all abandoned around the latter point of 2023 because so many ATACMS cluster munition rounds were flying directly into Crimea, not being destroyed by the Russian air defense, and slamming right down either into valuable aircraft, the logistics facilities, or the ammunition depots of these airports. Either one of those hits pretty much rendering every single single airfield unusable. And because of the great risk and danger that there was in losing aircraft and also having these entire squadrons or fighter wings completely knocked out of action, they moved them all into the Russian Federation, into the Krasnodar Krai area or the Rostov-on-Don Oblast, so that way there was the protection of them being technically inside of Russian territory. And at the point, Ukrainian long-range weaponry, which had been provided by the West, such as the Scalp EG and Storm Shadows, as well as the ATACMS, were not allowed to fire into Russia, meaning that as long as their airfield was across the border inside of Russia, the chance of those airfields being effectively attacked and destroyed was significantly less so than it was when they were inside of Crimea. And so for that reason, in the modern day, Crimea is not really that big of a strategic player as it used to be back in the day. It used to be a serious strategic player, as LSA Rocks throws in a 500.
Holy crap. $500, man. Jeez, we're up to 2,085 already. We're only 1,000 away from the goal this early.
That is freaking insane. It's only like 20 minutes into the actual show, and we're literally 1,000 away. We're killing it tonight, LSA, and make sure to hit the fundraiser goal the quickest that we possibly can. I know that the LSA can do it because we've done it time and time again every single weekend, and with this amazing news tonight, I know that we're going to have the revolutionary and patriotic zeal to be able to achieve our fundraiser goals, because there's one thing that's for sure: the LSA will never die. And so, moving on from that huge announcement and that massive shout out to LSA Rocks for throwing in a huge donation there, we are going to be getting back into the analysis of Crimea. And that is why, of course, getting back to the story, Crimea isn't even significant anymore in the war. It's actually the Russian Federation itself that is significant. And so now, with the permissions that have been given by the United States, Britain, and France today for the long-range weaponry to be used in Russia, every single Russian aircraft that fled Crimea, every single Russian warship that fled Crimea, every single supply hub, every single railhead that has supplied the Russian army for years at this point within the southern area of Ukraine is in jeopardy at this point of being knocked out and destroyed, much like it was when all of those supply hubs, all of those aircraft, and all of those ships were within Ukrainian occupied territory. And according to the additional comment that was made by the Russian military blogger Roman, targets deep within the country will face similar impacts. It's not catastrophic, of course, did have to mitigate there a little bit. It won't help former Ukraine reclaim its borders, but the consequences will surprise many, especially if these strikes are allowed to be carried out en masse, as was done in the new territories and Crimea. And so it does appear that this Russian mill blogger, while trying to keep a little bit of optimism at the end, is realizing that the time is nigh for the Russian army and things are going to be getting a lot worse. There are some significant targets that could be stricken just within the short period of time that we will be seeing in between the statement made today and the actual attacks that will probably be following within 48 hours. There are loads of Russian airfields in practically every single major city that is near Ukraine. For example, if we go down to Oriel right here, you can actually see one of these airfields. This one is unused, but we do believe that in the modern day, the Russian Air Force may be using it in some limited capacity, although there certainly are other airfields in the area that are also being used as well. If we move over to Bryansk, we can actually, I believe, see one of them. And let me see if I can find it really quickly. It's not this one. This one's a civil airport. I need to see if I can find the military airfield that's in the area. You can see the supply depots over here. These are actually major munitions hubs in this area that the Russians are still using, but I'm trying to see if we can find the airfield, because there is one around the Bryansk area, and for some reason my eyes elude me as I cannot find the airfield at this moment. For some reason this always happens whenever I try and geolocate anything live on air. I'll find it before the stream to make sure we can comment on it, and then when I go back to look for it, I've completely lost it and just cannot find this thing to save the life of me. And for some reason, it's like that tonight. It just be like that sometimes, unfortunately.
Are you looking for the strategic bomber base that Russia launches their bombers from during these large attacks?
Well, that would be down at Saratov and Ingles down here, which is this airfield. And we do know that that one will not be a target. It's too deep inside of Russia. It's just outside of its range by, I think, about 70 miles or so. So this one will not be targeted in at risk by Western long-range attacks inside of Russia at the moment. I'm trying to find the other airfields because I don't want to bring up the famous example because that would be kind of a cop-out at Morozovsk, which has been literally obliterated to smithereens through Ukrainian drone strikes. That one feels a little bit cheap, and so I'm not really wanting to bring that one up as an example. I'm wanting to find out some of the other airfields that are used, and there is one at Voronezh. We do know that for sure. It's actually this airfield in particular, which is still used by Russian aviation forces, including some Su-34 fighter bombers, to be able to strike into Ukraine. This one is now a target and can be stricken and destroyed. There is also another airfield around Voronezh, further north up here, which is a part of the Voronezh International Airport, and there also is another factory somewhere in this area around Voronezh that produces the oh wait a minute, it's over here. This is actually the factory right here that produces the Tu-144 supersonic strategic bombers that the Russian Federation is still using today. This facility can be targeted and destroyed by the Ukrainians. Not only that, major rail hubs such as this one right here can be targeted and destroyed by Ukrainian long-range strikes rather effectively, making sure to greatly decrease Russian logistical abilities, considering that most of Russia's supplies are transported by the railroads and not by road freight. And so, going off of this analysis that we're getting on what possible targets could be stricken by the Ukrainians, it is an incredibly large and voluminous number. It's such a large number of targets, this could truly start to change the face of the war. And we may see that the Russian Federation starts to get seriously put on the back foot here in the near future, as they will not be able, once again, to deal with the great amount of damage that is being caused to the Russian Federation's logistical and war-fighting abilities, and this may lead them to have a great deal of issues on the front line and to eventually be pushed back. But also, I saw someone say Tu-144, that's the Concorde, it's the Tu-160. You are absolutely right, I said that entirely wrong. The Tu-144, just to show you all this and get the correction out there, because I was entirely wrong on saying that, I said it really quickly, was the Soviet Concorde, which you can see right here. The Tu-160, which is the one I was actually supposed to mention, is the strategic bomber, which is pretty much a direct copy of the B-1 Lancer from the United States Air Force. But nevertheless, the impacts of these long-range strikes allowed now by the United States, Britain, and France are going to be pretty significant inside of the Russian Federation, and it even appears that in a prior statement, Putin has also apparently voiced that this may be the straw that broke the camel's back of a sort. He has said that this may end up turning the war entirely in Ukraine's favor, and that such an action like this would start to expand this into a broader conflict, a conflict that may consume the entirety of Europe in hellfire and fury as the grand, mighty, and invincible Russian army, invincible and legendary, or as they say in Russian, nekrasmoshinnaya I legendaria, will push across the entirety of Europe, storming through Warsaw, Berlin, Paris, and then somehow by an act of God freeze the North Atlantic and march straight across to Washington, ending the war and bringing the entire world under Russian control. Because we do have to remind everyone, we only exist because the Russians allow us to exist at this point. But nevertheless, many people have been putting in their comments at this point, beyond that sarcastic statement, about what they think Putin will be doing as a result of this. And it seems like some are saying that he's going to do absolutely nothing. Others are saying that Putin is going to end up attacking a NATO country here in a little bit. Some are saying that he'll use a weapon of mass destruction. And others are saying that they're a little unsure and undecided at the moment, which is understandable and somewhat relatable. But nevertheless, Matthew, what are folks thinking about this right now? And what are you thinking as well?
All right, so now that we do have confirmation today that the U.S. has granted permission for Ukraine to use these long-range U.S.-made weapons on Russian territory and in the Kursk region specifically, they can be used on the North Koreans and the Russian troops. And apparently they were sent due to the fact that North Korea has gotten involved in the war. This was designed to level the playing field just a little bit. But the question is, now that we know that Putin drew a red line with this act right here, how is Putin going to react? Because that's the big question. So 56% said he will do nothing because he bluffed, while 20% said Putin will attack a NATO country, and 13% said Putin will use a weapon of mass destruction on Ukraine. And this is a bit tricky because Putin is known for making very lofty red lines and then backing completely out of them because, of course, they've been dubbed the, the paper bear or paper tiger at this point. They are really not really having much of a bite. So I would say, honestly, he probably bluffed on this one, but at the same time, though, he specifically came out and gave a statement to the press about a month or two ago saying that if this right here happened, it would mean direct war with NATO. So we have not heard anything from the Kremlin Kremlin just yet about how Putin is going to react to this, but there is a possibility this could be maybe a real red line. But I'm kind of leaning toward the 56%. I think it might be another bluff. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say, I think he's capping on God busting for real. Like, beyond the sarcasm, though. For real, man. You heard me, man. I'll let you know what I mean. But beyond that, I would have to say that he's going to do absolutely nothing. And it's probably a bluff, because we did hear in the past, and let me see if Twitter will cooperate with me on the side. So, you know, on the down low, on the side, you know what I mean? So let's see if it'll work with me here. And it doesn't really look like Twitter's wanting to work at all. Don't you love technology, Matthew? Don't you love the internet? I love the internet. Like, just...
I love it, man. If you got a different browser, try that out, because that sometimes helped me when I had the issue earlier.
I don't have different...
You got that Microsoft Edge, man. You got Microsoft Edge over there? That wonderful browser?
I don't have that Edge. I only have the Chrome. But beyond that, let me go and get the statement, because I want to bring this up right here. Because this is the statement that Putin made directly about the situation. He made this statement in St. Petersburg, of all places. Y'all want to know why I know that? Well, because I'm stupid, and I know a little bit too much information, and I can actually show y'all exactly where he was standing when he made that statement. So, this is the General Staff Building. Let's get an exterior picture. Right there. Okay, we don't want the music. Forget the music. But beyond that, this is the General Staff Building. Now, you'll see it in the background right there. You'll also see this column, this big, giant column. And so, if we were to take that information directly off the nail, we were to understand that he was standing somewhere right here in this little corridor, or this little area right here, and was being filmed as he was looking towards the building. Actually, let's make sure that we're... Actually, no, he's looking at this at an angle. And there's actually this special little sort of a concrete sort of a shape and structure that is seen behind him. Actually, interestingly enough, he would have been, I think, in that alley right there. Let's see here. Wait a minute. He was on the other side. I absolutely, like, I saw the picture, because here's the State Hermitage Museum, which was once the Winter Palace. So let me actually drop y'all down over here, because now I'll be able to show y'all this properly. So he was standing right about there. Right about there. And then if you look across the square, you can see the column, you can see the blue building in the background, which is what is exactly right there. So that's exactly where he made this statement. Just in case you all are wondering, where did he say this? But nevertheless, this is what he said. And I'm going to make sure to read the subtitles as well, so that we all can hear it. It's not about whether to allow the Ukrainian regime to strike Russia with these weapons or not. It's about making a decision for NATO countries to get directly involved in the military conflict or not. If this decision is made, it will mean nothing else but a direct involvement of NATO countries, the US, European countries, in the war in Ukraine. It's a direct involvement, and certainly, or as it said in the subtitles right there, it's certainly, right there you can see it's certainly, and certainly, it dramatically changes the whole nature of the conflict. It will mean that NATO countries, the US, European countries, are fighting with Russia. And if so, given the change of the nature of the conflict, we will take respective decisions given the dangers that will be posed to us. And this thing
I don't know, man. That was a pretty direct statement right there. But, you know, one thing I do notice, like, listening back to it this time, is he really stopped short of saying exactly what they were going to do. He said he would take respective actions, but that could mean literally anything. That's like the equivalent of saying, we'll do something, but we're not sure yet. You know, he made a strong statement saying that the war would be between NATO and Russia, but they've already been kind of saying that already. So, you know, it could be a nothing burger maybe, but it was a direct statement.
It was a direct statement. And it is an interesting one, but I'm not going to lie, I think he's capping. Because haven't they said many things like this before? Like sanctioning Russia is an act of war, and giving Ukraine any weaponry is an act of war, and giving them F-16s is an act of war, and giving them ATACMS in any form is an act of war, and letting the Ukrainians hit the Crimean Bridge is an act of war, and then pushing the Russians back in Kyiv and in Kharkiv and in the area of Kherson was an act of war. And then if the Ukrainians fought in the territories that the Russians supposedly annexed, that was going to be an act of war. And if the Polish ever shot down any drones, that would be an act of war. And if Romania ever tried to shoot down any drones, that would also be an act of war. And if the United States didn't allow the Russians to ship their oil out to Europe, that would also be an act of war. The Nord Stream pipeline getting hit was an act of war. Pretty much anything and everything that's happened to the Russians for 3 years now has been an act of war, according to Putin and the entire Russian government. And I think that this is one of the other ones that is going to be, once again, another act of war statement. They've made the statement so many times, it holds no weight, in my opinion. And I would have to say that I think this is going to fall under the exact same thing. He's going to do nothing, and it's a bluff. It's just another one like many, and once we call it the bluff, he's probably just going to do nothing, because the truth is, at this point, that the Russians don't really have any way to fight back against NATO, because there has to be an escalatory ladder that they go up, because that's how it always works. First, they would have to start a conventional war. And that's the problem. They don't even have the ability to start a conventional war with anyone beyond Ukraine, because Ukraine's literally eating up so much of their abilities and manpower and equipment that they're having to draw in North Koreans in mass to be able to fill in the gaps that they're not able to continue to anymore. So for that reason, I don't think there's anything that they can do, because they're not going to just start flinging nukes tomorrow. That doesn't allow them the ability to escalate step by step and see where they can hop off the escalatory ladder and get to some sort of a conclusion that they like. And so for that reason, I honestly think they're probably going to do nothing, in my opinion.
You know, the only thing that might suggest, Enforcer, that maybe they're thinking or at least considering maybe doing something rash in response to this is we did get a statement from apparently a senior Russian senator that remains unnamed, according to the source here. They said, the senator, that is, in Russia, said the U.S. decision could result in Ukrainian statehood in complete ruins by morning. So obviously that kind of hints at like a nuclear threat there. But so far, that's the only thing we've heard out of Russia up to this point, was that senior unnamed Russian senator making that statement, at least allegedly. So, you know, it's kind of odd. Like, it would seem like if this was indeed a hard and fast red line, that Putin would be out immediately saying, okay, this is war with NATO, and we're going to have to take action against them. And so far, we've heard nothing. It kind of reminds me of after the F-16s arrived in Ukraine and we saw them flying around, Putin said that was a nuclear threat. And then he never came out and said a word after that either. So it kind of like is reminiscent of the same thing.
It's reminiscent of everything that they've done, man. Like, over the entire war, they've said this about literally anything and everything, from what I can remember. And I remember that, you know, there's people out there like Douglas McGregor who every single time they say something like that, they're like, oh, we're really toast if they decide to really, you know, start this thing off because we only exist because the Russians allow us to exist, you know, or something like that. And it's like, there's many issues with this right now. If the Russians didn't want to go to war, and Putin even said that, it's like, where do they get the troops? They don't even have any left. You know, like, all of them are in Ukraine right now, and the rest of the Russian army that exists isn't combat troops, because remember, folks, when you hear the number that the Russian army has about 750,000 active service members, you know, and then the Russian military is about 1.2 million strong, but the army makes up most of it, most of those guys in the Russian army aren't combat troops. They're logistics guys, construction guys, engineering guys, the cooks, everything else that requires the armies to function. Those guys make up those roles. So there's not really that many combat personnel in the Russian army, just like there is in any armed force. And that means that if the Russians have around 200,000 or so combat troops involved in Ukraine, that's literally all of them. There's none left. So if the Russians want to go, okay, this is war with NATO, kiss my ass, and they fired rockets into Poland and the Baltic states and such things to just start off this war, the problem is there's literally no one left to defend Russia's border in the Baltics or in Finland. There's no one there. So if they started that war, the tiny Estonian army would literally be able to just start driving from Narva straight to St. Petersburg and probably run into no resistance along the way except for the police, because there wouldn't be any Russian army there to fight them. That's the crazy thing about this war at this point, is that the Russians really do have their hands tied. The only way that they can respond back against anything would be directly against Ukraine, because the West is off the table. They have to be able to start a conventional war first, that then justify firing off tactical nuclear weapons. If they don't even have the ability to protect their borders before they fired a preemptive assault or some sort of preemptive missile attack on the West, they have no way to actually feasibly start a war with the West and then justify nuclear escalation later on down the road. So they're pretty much, their hands are tied in that metric. So anything that they're going to do is going to have to end up being directed towards Ukraine. And we don't know what they would do. Usually what we've seen, though, is that the hype talk is usually met with the biggest letdown. It's like a Jake Paul, Mike Tyson fight every single time, because like once the red line is crossed, they'll be like, you did it this time, we're really going to get you, you are going to level Ukraine, and then it's just like 5 extra drones in the next attack compared to the last one, or something like that. It's not even a big deal.
And also, Russia can't
Holy
get 2.
smokes!
Oh my god, man. 3.
Rita Fuchs!
That's the goal.
Daddy, we're $10 short. Oh my god! Oh my god! Weird. Oh!
We hit it.
Oh!
Oh! Jaga, Igor. We are $10 over the goal, and I love to see it.
Holy smokes!
Slava, yes sir, let's go. That's man. Let's see here. It's about 40 minutes into the show, and we dang man. Did somebody throw in another one? How to get
Hal Rose throwing in 333.
Damn. Listen, hold on. I got to write these down, man. Go ahead and take over so I can write them down real quick.
Holy moly. That's crazy right there. I got to give y'all a huge shout out because in only less than 40 minutes since the show's beginning, we have hit the fundraiser goal. An absolutely unbelievable thing, and another major feat and a major victory of the Lee Spring Army. We love to see the Lee Spring Army wins time and time again because y'all folks are absolutely incredible. Y'all have massive hearts of gold. Y'all have been able to keep this channel running and help us to keep this thing rolling and possible, because if it was not for folks like you, we wouldn't have been able to be here this night. We wouldn't have been able to be here for multiple nights. And also, sorry, by the way, Nathaniel Doggett, I believe there was some friendly fire involved in that one.
There was friendly fire. I was trying to get that bot, and it was going fast. I accidentally got Nathaniel instead. That was friendly fire. Sorry about that, Nathaniel.
Yeah, sorry about that, because I also saw what Matthew was trying to ban too, and I think I got it, Matthew. Yeah, I did get it. So with that, I do want to say, though, that the Lee Spring Army is absolutely incredible. And time again, y'all have shown the entire world that the Lee Spring Army means business and backs up its words with real, discernible action. And tonight, again, y'all have achieved this amazing goal. And y'all continue to make sure that the phrase, the Lee Spring Army will never die, remains a reality throughout all time up to this point. And so a massive shout out to each and every one of y'all, because it is not us who make these fundraisers possible. It is every single member of the Lee Spring Army who makes this thing possible every single weekend, every single Sunday, for this to be a reality. And so a huge shout out to all of y'all once again for the amazing donations and support that y'all have thrown into this fundraiser tonight. And Matthew, with that, I do understand that we were talking about Russian escalation in the future. Yes. And so what were your takes on that before you got interrupted by us hitting the goal?
So I was saying here that Russia can't get too wild and crazy. Like, for example, if they decide, okay, that was a real red line and we're actually going to follow through with our threat and go to direct war with NATO and start attacking, let's say they send a missile into Poland, they can't get too crazy because right now, North Korea is the only country with direct involvement in the war. Of course, we're seeing Iran send drones over and equipment, but they're not directly involved in the war, meaning like they're not actually sending troops to go fight inside of Ukraine on Russia's behalf. But North Korea is not a superpower, and North Korea is very poor, and also they're struggling themselves. So it's like the blind leading the blind here a little bit. North Korea really can't come in and do very much for Russia, except for offer a few sacrifices here and there from time to time. And then on the China front, China does not want to get directly involved either, because they know that's really not good for their own interest, but they will sneak a few things under the table that are dual-use goods to Russia just to help out their buddy. But really, they're a little bit lukewarm when it comes to the alliance. They're not all the way like unrestricted as they like to claim. They do have boundaries when it comes to helping Russia. So, you know, Russia honestly is kind of like on an island of its own right now. Even though they do have technically allies, they're not hard and fast allies. So I don't think they could get too crazy for that reason.
I would have to agree. I don't think it can get too crazy for those reasons as well, because the Russians don't have a lot of foreign support, and they have no materials or resources currently to make anything possible inside of the Baltic, well, really against NATO as a whole, outside of Ukraine, in the Baltic states or Finland, or actually against Poland, where their front lines would originally start. That's what we're seeing at the moment, and I would have to generally say that this is something, at least in my opinion, the Russians will not be able to follow through on. So I feel like it's all hype talk and no bite for the best part to explain that, at least with what I'm thinking at the moment. But still, absolutely major news and wonderful to see that that is the case. But moving on from that and on into Ukraine itself, we have loads and loads and loads of news to cover tonight. It's almost back to basics like we used to cover the news when Ukraine was literally the biggest thing going on in the world pretty much each and every day. It is pretty much again tonight. We have one little clip from the Middle East, but it's the only one. It's not really a part of a bigger news segment, so it'll just be mentioned briefly at the end of the show tonight. But still, moving on from that and on into the rest of the news that we were able to get, we did hear that there was a drone attack that happened in the Bryansk Oblast. We were not able to hear a lot of details about this, and the Russians claim to have already shot down 26 drones. We have no video or picture evidence to confirm that this attack happened, but we are going to report it just in case if it did, so that way we can circle back and then talk about it later and let y'all know that that did happen. And so, moving on from the Bryansk area and down into the area around Kyiv, we actually do have some information to talk about with a massive drone and missile attack that was launched by Russia last night. The air defense reports did come out, and it does appear that a massive amount of drones and missiles were shot down overnight. Just to give y'all a little bit of the details on what these drones and missiles were, we did see that one 3M22 called the, let's see here, the Zircon was shot down. The Zircon hypersonic missile was shot down last night. At least one of them was. We were also able to see that several, Kinzhal hypersonic missiles were shot down as well. So the Ukrainians actually had a pretty decent success rate in shooting down hypersonics. They shot down 7 Kinzhals and 1 Zircon. And also, if y'all are wondering, like, why in the world does it sound like he's reading it? I am reading them. Like, I'm literally just reading the Russian and, well, the Ukrainian actually, and figuring out what they are. They shot down 85 caliber missiles, which is an insanely high number of missiles to fire in a single attack. This number actually is getting kind of on up there towards the first Iranian attack against Israel, which required coalition help, as well as Israeli air defenses, which are internationally renowned for being very effective, to be able to shoot down this number of missiles. The Ukrainians had to do that single-handedly last night and did fairly well at that. We also saw that they shot down 4 X-22s and X-31Ps. They also shot down 5 X-59s, and they also shot down 42 Bila drones, which are pretty much the Shahed 136s that are produced inside of the Russian Federation, license produced from the Iranian model. It still appears, though, that the Russians are trying to completely cripple the Ukrainian nation as it's moving on into winter. And this is usually when we see, historically, that both sides start really ramping up their airstrikes, because the damages are really strongly felt during winter as compared to the summer because of the harsh climate and weather conditions that exist. And this generally makes it a lot more difficult to maintain power infrastructure and also keep people alive, because there's a good chance that they could just freeze to death if the power infrastructure is knocked out. But we also got to see the path of every missile and drone that was fired into the country. And once again, I want to bring notice to this. Notice that there are no more missiles being fired from ships inside the Black Sea. I want y'all to notice that very particularly. There are ships that are in the eastern Black Sea now that sail out of Novorossiysk, pop off their missiles, and then turn back, but these now have to go through the major air defense net inside of the Kherson area, and that usually catches a decent amount of them. We also saw that, of course, there was a great deal of launches of missiles from inside of the areas of the Belgorod and Kursk Oblast still, as these are generally still the main launch locations of Russian missiles, and this is why the authorization for Ukraine to be able to strike deep into Russia is a big deal today, because they'll be able to knock out most of those strikes. We did also see that a large amount of the calibers appear to have actually been fired from the Russian Navy and then fired into Western Ukraine over the longer distance routes that fly through Kherson and then through Kryvyi Rih. We also got to see another interesting thing, and I want to make sure that we get this correct here. And I'm looking for the Kinzhals and the other hypersonics. It doesn't really look like they're specifically noted here, which is a very interesting thing, because I actually don't see a specific mention of them here on this map. But still, interesting to see the assault paths from last night, and we did get to see some successes and defeats of the Ukrainian air defense at night. For example, we got to see that one Ukrainian was able to shoot down a Russian missile with a man-pad. Allow me to show you all this right before the cameraman almost got blasted in the nuts by the black blast. So here's the clip, and there goes the missile.
Ракета вышла!
Oh!
Yes!
Oh, he did it, man.
Man, hit it harder than hit it way harder actually than either one of Jake Paul or Mike Tyson hit each other during that whole fight. Really impressive stuff. And we also got to see just north of Kyiv that a decoy drone was recovered. It was shot down by the Ukrainians somehow, some way, but these decoy drones are now starting to be used in larger numbers, and they're meant to eat up some of the Ukrainian air defense abilities and give a slightly higher chance to the real Russian drones, such as the Shaheds, to be able to make it through the air defense and hit their targets somewhere in the area. It's very interesting to note that because it is starting to show that Russian drone warfare tactics or drone strike tactics are beginning to evolve. Unfortunately, while some air defense efforts were successful, like this one outside of Kharkiv today, which I'll be showing y'all.
Вон за проводами йде.
And we hear the drone coming on up,
Зараз підпускай.
and they're about to start greasing it.
Прицел знайшов. Робота, робота.
Just pull out the Toyota Tacoma and get to blasting.
Yeah.
You think this will avoid the warrant?
I'm not really sure. Good question, though.
Oh my god, no way he hit that. Like, that guy hit that with that gun?
Bro, no scope. Oh my god, I cannot believe it.
Crazy. That is wild. I was not expecting him to hit that.
I wasn't expecting him to hit it either. I thought we were just going to see it fly off in the distance. This man shot a drone down that looked like it was out of visual range. We can't even see it on the camera. He shot it down with a M2 Browning 50 cal. That is actually crazy. Like, that's actually insane. Look at this. That is crazy. Like, I cannot believe that he did that. But that was impressive right there. This guy didn't even have to whip out the man pad to really get it. This guy got it with a 50 cal. That is amazing stuff right there. Someone needs to call him into the moderators, though, and let them know that he's hacking, because I'm sure he's got an aimbot on to be able to hit something like that. Also, the Don said he does have a scope. The no-scope thing is a reference to an old MLG gamer thing from, like, the early 2010s about, like, MLG no-scope. If you know what that means, you do. If you don't, you don't. I highly suggest you Google it, though, because there's, like, a whole entire culture revolving around the whole no-scope thing. It really just means that you have a lot of skill, at least in the way I was saying it. But moving on from that and into the area around Kremenchuk, we did get to see that while there were successes in intercepting and shooting down these drones, there was also some bitter results as well, as we did see one Russian missile did end up slamming directly into the Kremenchuk dam just north of the town of Kremenchuk in this clip right here.
You know, a really sick attack, too, because pretty much all the targets of the missiles were all electrical stations and things like that. They were trying to knock out the electrical grid inside of Ukraine. And I did hear that Ukraine has had to cut back on some of their power transmission due to these hits, especially here at this one as well. So just another example of Russian war crimes indeed hitting a civilian-based infrastructure like that.
It is very unfortunate. Luckily, though, it appears that the dam structure has not been breached, so there's also not going to be a flood resulting from the hit. Dams are incredibly thick with the amount of concrete that they use, and so for this reason, it usually a single missile cannot wipe out a dam. It usually takes an incredibly large amount of explosives to destroy one and completely pretty much break it open and the reservoir behind it. So luckily, the folks of Kremenchuk are safe, but the power plant is going to be taking a small hit in productivity for some while until repairs can be effected. But moving on out of the missile attacks, which were very unfortunate to see, we're now going to be moving on up into the Kursk Oblast, because while these missile attacks were going on and attempting to hammer the Ukrainian energy infrastructure, we did see that the Russian forces inside the area of Kursk are still continuing to try and hammer the Ukrainian defensive positions in this area and push them out of Russia entirely. And we were able to see that once again today, the Ukrainian drones were once again slamming the Russians. Also, pretty classic. But we can see here.
Is that German? That sounded a little German.
Yeah, it's German. It's like,
Yes.
Geschlägt weil ich mir in die Deutschen.
No, it wasn't anything like that. It was just a folk song.
But then the Luftwaffe pops in the chat. It's like, ooh, they ain't beating the charges today. It's like,
now, see, if the Luftwaffe didn't walk in, we might have been okay.
But these guys, they were just playing a silly little song right there. They like it. You know, it's good. And I got to say, it's a classic folk song. But moving on from that and into the area of Bolshoi Soldatskoye, we got to see that once again, the Russian 810th Naval Infantry Brigade suffered serious losses today in another attack against the 225th Battalion of the 168th Territorial Defense Brigade. And, oh, it's just toasting out there. Roasting even. Long-lasting roast. Chestnuts roasting on an open fire. Russians nibbling at their toes because they're hungry. But nevertheless, it is something to see and great to know that the Ukrainians are still holding the line very strong. We also got to see that a Russian priest who was at the lines today is already starting to spread some very interesting statements about the North Koreans. It appears that they already hate them, and so I'm going to be reading the subtitles from this video. These are not my words, they're his, but I want y'all to know what a Russian Orthodox priest, a official Russian Orthodox priest of the Russian army, is saying about the North Koreans at this point. So, here we go. Tomorrow, you'll see for yourself. Death in some kind of disease, or else. God said these words. I will judge you as a friend, you bleed. Don't you see, our Korean comrades have arrived from distant lands who don't believe in God. They brought some kind of illness with them. God deniers with atheist sins, bleed. God punishes them for it, and he punishes us for accepting them in our home, bleed. Don't take the sin in your soul. Don't listen to their devilish speech, bleed. The God's word guide them on the path of truth. Or Russians, bleed. God's with us, bleed. Cross is our banner and our weapon, right? This guy,
Man, I don't know what the North Koreans are saying to like make this guy say that, because apparently they're telling the Russians something based on what he's saying right there. So it's like, what are they trying to like indoctrinate the Russians into the Kim like brainwashing techniques or something? I don't know what they're saying.
Dude, this Orthodox priest heard one North Korean say, yeah, you know, like God and Jesus is great and all, but have you ever heard of the great efforts of the Juche? And he went, these people are godless, sinless, the people they need to be like. It's like this guy went crazy.
This man is a heretic. He's evil. He's a Lucifer. He's the devil. It's like, damn, man. He does not like Juche, I guess.
Dude, he sat there and heard one North Korean say, our great godlike leader, the sun himself, Kim Jong-il. And he said, these people are godless and with no vision, no passion, no effing mindset. It's like, this guy went on.
Like they don't, and the Russians are acting like they don't worship Putin every day. It's like,
yeah,
nobody says anything bad about him. Apparently they're worshiping him too. The whole Russian Orthodox Church is like designed as Putin's like worship machine. It's like, come on now, don't be hypocrites.
Dude, and this guy sat there and he's saying, they brought the disease from a far off land. Like, it's like the freaking Middle Ages now. Like, they're bringing the Black Plague with them. It's like, what the hell's wrong with this? Like, this guy is legitimately crazy, I think. But it is showing, though, that the Russians are already trying to spread amongst themselves, don't like the North Koreans a single bit, just hate them. And that's kind of normal, actually. We usually see that. And it's not just the Russians directing that hatred towards people who aren't Russians. Usually they hate each other pretty well. Like the Russians from Western Russia, in what we would call European Russian, generally hate everyone from Asia Russian. Asia and Asian Russia. And it's generally vice versa. The people from the Caucasus Mountain regions hate the European Russians. Everyone hates everyone in Russia. So this isn't anything new at all. The North Koreans are now just being the new ones included in the hate circle that the Russians keep going inside their country. So that is nothing new at all, but still pretty funny to see that the North Koreans and the Russians on a diplomatic level, Matthew, are like, we are friends forever. And then on the ground, the Russian people are going, we hate these people, godless people. People come from far away, bad disease. Like, I was like, what the hell?
Isn't it kind of weird? Like, look at the differences here between the two different forces currently at play. You have us over here on the NATO side of things. We all generally get along, except for some disagreements here and there on a diplomatic level. But there's like a deeply rooted hatred amongst the Axis forces, like Russia, Iran, China, North Korea, etc. They actually all hate each other, like personally for personal reasons, and that is not going to hold up. And like you're going to see here on the battlefield with the North Koreans and the Russians, you're going to see those cracks start forming, and they're already treating the North Koreans horribly. Like they're already sending them out first and putting them in really bad situations to get killed first, so that way the Russians can live longer, and not much longer, but a little bit longer, maybe a couple of weeks extra. But the cracks are forming right now. We're seeing it right here.
I would have to agree. It looks like things are not going to be going well in between the two. And I have a feeling relations are going to continue to deteriorate, especially when the North Koreans come up, Matthew, and they're like, "Oh, hello, from our great leader, Kim Jong-un. Would you like to have dog meat?" And then the Russians going to be like, "Throw a grenade at that man. He's blasphemous," or something like this. Like, they're
Only
not going
the freshest. We want it canned just a week ago.
What kind of dog is it? Only the finest? Korean yellow spitz? Oh yeah, that's the kind I like, Blade. Bring it on. Something like that. It's like, yeah, I don't know. But moving on from that, we also did get to see the Ukrainian artillery hammering Russian positions. This is actually the artillery of the 82nd Brigade, which has been in the area for months now. And look at them go. The shells are just in a hidey hole in the ground. Putting in the fuses. Firing the SPGs, the towed artillery, slamming Russians wherever they may be.
Man, I've heard the Ukrainians are having short fuses put in these days.
Giggity, giggity.
Please laugh. Please clap.
Please laugh.
And nobody laughed. Poor Jeb.
Man, it's very sad. Oh! And that's the end of that clip, but a wonderful thing to see, and great to see the artillery hard at work. But moving on from that and on down into the location unknowns, we got some fairly interesting ones today. Only 2 of them, but they're still fairly interesting. But before we get into them and the casualty report, which was pretty funny today, and it's because it has it's like got the best typo I've ever seen before, I do want to make sure that we talk about something that has been going on tonight in the background. This amazing fundraiser. Thanks to the sun-faced leader of the Lee Spring Army, the people of this amazing organization, not Matthew and me, but each and every single one of y'all, we have been able to see that our revolutionary fervor and beliefs in the Western world and American military might has once again seen us through to the ultimate triumphant victory. I'm trying to talk like a North Korean news reporter here, I'd like to make fun of him, but beyond that, getting past all of that goofiness, y'all have been able to knock out another fundraiser tonight impressively. We were able to hit the fundraiser goal, and not only that, we're about $600 over at this point, which are it's wonderful to see. It's absolutely unbelievable, and we've been seeing some of the largest single bits of support tonight that we've been seeing in a while. We are absolutely blown away by it, and we got to thank all of y'all so much, every single one of y'all who's been throwing in support. And we do also want to list off some names that we put on the list, but nevertheless, it's not a bad list. And also, another thing I want to say is that we will not be able to call off everyone. There's always a large amount of people who support the fundraisers, and we believe that is one of the most impressive and amazing things. And if it wasn't for each and every one of y'all, whether y'all putting in a single dollar or $500 combined, the total would not be possible if it wasn't for every single person doing their part. Nevertheless, we can only call out the folks who donated over 50, because usually the list is somewhat more manageable, at least only calling out the donations over 50, but I do want to remind every single one of y'all that we do not call out that if it wasn't for the massive bulk of the folks who throw in support under 50, the fundraisers would never be possible. They would never hit their goals. Y'all account for around half of what these fundraisers raise, and I've got to give y'all a massive shout out and a thanks to every single one of y'all, whether we call y'all out or not here in a second, because each one of y'all did y'all's part to make this fundraiser possible and to blow it away again. And so, Matthew, tell us who the top donors of the night were.
All right, we've already raised a ton of money for Nova Ukraine, and we're going to go ahead and start off here by checking our papers, that is, and reading off
Checking
the
your
top
papers?
donations. Yeah, not checking. You did the German thing and had me thinking that in my head, and I just said it out loud by accident. We're not checking your papers. We're going to check our paper here and see who the top donors of the night are, and try to move past that unfortunate little incident there. Moving on to this first one, we have a very generous $500 donation from LSA Rocks, and huge shout to LSA Rocks for throwing in the largest donation of the night and being very generous to Nova Ukraine, which is a great charity indeed. And also, huge shout out to Hal Rose for putting in a $333 donation, and thank you very much, Hal, for that generosity also. Then we had a $300 from Rita Fuchs, who put in that $300 as well, very generous. Also a $200 from Corsair F4U, and a $100 from some guy called the Enforcer, along with Hal Rose, who put in another $100, bringing us up to a total of about $433 raised from Hal Rose, as well as a $100 from Alan Matthews, as well as Char G, as well as a Peace with War, who threw in a $100, along with Bob P, Barky Bark Dog, as well as Tom S, And then we had a 50 from Philip Fixes LSA, as well as Neil Vizanot, Loki V2, as well as Bodie Burt and Leor Avigile, and also Mike Smith and Greg Carrier. And huge shout out to all the top donors that have donated tonight. And like the Enforcer mentioned as well, huge shout out to all those who we were not able to call off that put in one under 50, because all the donations add up and they have reached $3,595, which is tremendous to see once again. And Enforcer, what say you?
And I gotta say that it is absolutely amazing, and it's wonderful to see that y'all were able to raise this amazing amount. It's truly incredible, and I've got to thank every single one of y'all once again for the major support that y'all have given to Nova Ukraine tonight, because it's going to be helping out incredibly well on into the future, especially over in Ukraine, where it matters a great deal at this point. And so with that, a big shout out to y'all once again. And before we move on from this segment, I would suppose that right now, Matthew, is a good time to answer a couple of questions from the chat. I understand that there's a lot of people out there with many questions right now, especially considering the events of today, and let's see if we can answer at least a few of them. And so, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so for one of the live chat questions, let's go ahead and address this poll that's been running here. It's been going for about 18 minutes or so, and it says here, reports claim that North Korea might send 100,000 more troops to Russia to fight in the war, and the big question is this likely, or is it simply hype talk by the Russians? So 68% said yes, North Korea will eventually send those 100,000 troops, while 13% said no, North Korea is simply yapping, and another 13% said maybe so, but it's somewhat unlikely. And I would say 100,000 troops. Based on what I've heard, it sounds like it wouldn't be 100,000 at once, like, send 100,000 troops over, because that would be a ton at one time. It sounds like maybe that's 100,000 in rotation. So I think it's probably likely they will do that, because North Korea seems to be helping out all they can in the war, and I think they could probably swing this, and I think they're trying to actually get rid of some of their people, and I think that's part of the reason why they're sending them. So I think it is actually likely. So I'm with the 68%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that I do believe that the North Koreans are going to be sending more. Not only does it help them to continue to get more resources and supplies from the Russians to help out their internal situation, it also ensures that they will be able to gain more or less at least military experience abroad, which is something that they've not been able to do really since the Korean War. So, in my opinion, I would certainly say yes, the North Koreans are going to be sending more, because they're going to be gaining some interesting experience and also resources from this. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least the best I can. And with that, we are now moving on into the next question.
And also, I see people saying in the live chat, apparently Kim is trying to thin out the population over there in North Korea, and that helps with the famine. I guess Kim, when he said he was going to fix the famine, I guess this was what he meant. He was going to fix the famine by not getting more food, but getting rid of some of the mouths to feed. So that actually might be part of the motivation. That's how depraved the guy is. But anyways, moving on here to our first live chat question. This one's going to go to Beef Taco, who says, do you think the increased range allowance is too little and too late? And will it have a real impact for Ukraine?
No, I don't think it's too little or too late. The Russians are in a pretty bad shape at this point. This isn't World War II, where you're just advancing every day about 10 miles a day and the war is practically over, and then the Me-262 Messerschmitt and the Me-163 Comet come on the scene, and it truly is too little and too late, because the situation logistically and on the ground has been completely lost at this point. The Ukrainians are not in that kind of a situation. The Russians are making little to no advances per day at this point. They are taking incredibly high losses. Generally, it does look like this war could go on for years beyond this point, and it doesn't really look like the Ukrainians have been that far damaged or destroyed to be completely out of the war where it'd be too little or too late at this point. The long-range strike permissions is coming at just any other time. It's really not that big of a deal that it came at this point. It's not like it's over and this is just a token thing. This is a pretty decent time. The Russians are going all in at this point too, meaning that supply consumption is happening at a much faster rate than it has at any other point in the conflict so far, because they are conducting offensives literally from Kupiansk and all the way down into Robotny, and every single one of them is consuming a large amount of supplies and ammunition. And now that the Ukrainians have the permission to strike deep into Russia, they're able to hit the supply depots that are giving these guys the ammo to keep fighting. And if they're able to do that, and the Russians keep eating through this quickly, that means that the Russians' offensives are either going to grind to a halt, or they're going to start getting beaten back in the future because they expended all of their munitions at this point. Either way, the Russians are going to be in a pretty bad condition with these deep strikes happening, and so in my opinion, I would honestly have to say that it's not really that case. Like, a lot of people want to make it sound like it's doomsday. And once again, I kind of have to just be honest here. The Ukraine war never was doomsday until the presidential election happened, and then some people want to act like it's just truly over now and chat we're cooked, and it's just not the case. The war is going to keep going. From everything that we hear, it seems as though the incoming administration is actually fairly in support of continuing the war in Ukraine for a good bit. There is there is a decent pursuit at the moment of trying to get to the negotiating table, but that doesn't even guarantee anything, because if we're trying to see the Western interests are secured in Ukraine and Western interests cannot be secured, the war will just continue until there's favorable terms being given out in the negotiations by the Russians. So at this point, I would largely have to say chat's not cooked, chat's roasting, as a matter of fact, and probably going to be doing quite well on in the future. That would be at least my opinion. And also, let's see here. I will also want to address this really quickly because this is something that I've seen some people talking about. There's been a certain person out there who has become fairly political, and this was a statement that I have to be honest, I just have to address really quickly because it's one that a lot of people looked at, and then someone said, you're joking about, let me see your papers, what's going to happen soon. Someone who owns a certain social media platform, which we're having server issues with tonight, put out a statement a little while ago that certain people who said certain things a couple of years ago were going to be held accountable and the hammer of justice is coming. I just want to make this very clear that that guy is not going to be in the government in any way, shape, or form. And also on top of that, this guy has absolutely no ability to act as law enforcement or the jurisdiction of the U.S. government or a state government on any level. So that's just nothing more than hype talk, honestly, from someone who's getting hall monitor syndrome, to be entirely honest. So like I wouldn't really worry about that at all, because that's not going to be happening. And also on top of that, because someone says something doesn't mean you're going to be rounded up and put in a camp, because I don't think a lot of people are remembering this. Just because that is what someone wants to do, there's a lot of stupid people out there like that. That doesn't mean that the courts in the United States are just going to go, you know what, we're going to put people in camps now because of what they say. No, because you still have First Amendment protected rights, and that's freedom of expression. So you still get to say whatever you want on those kinds of things. You know, that's how America works. That is what it is. And so that's what I had to say about that. If you're going to take a statement from just some third-party guy who just happens to say some of the shittiest takes and cooks up some of the goofiest stuff sometimes, I wouldn't really take that too seriously, because, it's not really like that means anything, to be entirely honest. That's like saying that, like just some random person in the chat. That's like saying someone comes in here and says, all of y'all are going to be in camps. Or why would we believe him? Like, it's not like he's the law. It's not like he's the Congress, the office of the president, and the Supreme Court combined. This is just some guy. And a lot of people say crazy stuff all the time, and it doesn't matter whether they're rich or poor. Stupid stuff is stupid stuff, and people can see it for what it is. And also, society doesn't function that way either. And so, with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. I also see some people saying some things that are just legally untrue. Like someone said jury nullification is going to be so big. I don't think you know this, but the president of the United States, or anyone for that matter, can't just go down into a state court and start saying, you're going to get everyone who says this, and by the way, no jury trials for him. That does not happen. Like, at all. Like, that will never happen, because that's just not how the justice system is structured. Like, I honestly...
It's actually written in the Constitution, you have a right to a jury trial.
Yeah, it's literally in the Constitution as a constitutional amendment in the Bill of Rights that you have a right to trial by jury of your peers. So it's not like someone's just going to come down and go, oh, by the way, that's just smacked down, and then no one challenges that, and then the Supreme Court overturns that. That's not going to happen. I have to be honest, usually I believe that a lot of the fear that comes from people in the political world on either end comes from their ignorance of how the government functions. Because so many people think that the government works like it does in the movies or something like that. Like Homelander ends up, having his guy elected for president, so now he's going to round up everyone who doesn't like superheroes. It doesn't work like that in real life. It's a very complicated bureaucratic structure and a system. It was made deliberately for that reason, that things like that would be very difficult. And so I would have to be entirely honest, I don't know why people are saying that, and also things are largely going to continue status quo. We keep saying that. We have no proof yet, but things are going to continue on status quo. I can promise y'all that the war in Ukraine is not going to be ending in January or February. I can promise y'all that. It's going to go on for a good while longer. People are going to be shocked to see it too. And you know what's going to be even crazier? And I'll put money on this. Some people right now that are really adamant for the war are going to be against the war probably in about a half a year after January, because they're not going to like that the new president is supporting the war at that point. And that's how people work in America. And that's also how the political structure works in America, is that the side is in charge, will see the writing on the wall that they have to do something that must be done. And supporting Ukraine is inherently inside of American and Western interests, and regardless of whether we want the war to end or not, there are certain conditions that must be reached for us to say that we got what we wanted out of the war. That means it will keep going until we get those conditions. And when people see that the incoming administration will keep doing the same thing that they've been doing for years now under the current administration, some people are going to be well, actually, I will promise you, the current administration and the group associated with it will start to say that wars are terrible and the whole war is happening because the current side is warmongers and they want to kill everyone, just like the opposition who's about to become the president is saying about the current side right now. And that will be the status quo. And then we'll go through another 3 or 4 years of one side calling the one in charge warmongers, and then that side saying that we have to achieve what we need to achieve for our strategic interests, and then it'll change, and then life will keep going. That's how it works. Like, I'm sorry, like, some people don't like that because some people like to think that they're on the side of the righteous truth, and then the other side is that of the terrible demons, but that is largely how it works when you look at it from a third-person perspective. So I hope that does address that the best I can, making sure to keep it as politically neutral as possible, but I generally do want to try and explain there's no reason to really be concerned or fearful about what's going to be happening in Ukraine, because I can largely promise you that it's going to be the same that we're seeing right now. It may even go a little bit further down the path that we're seeing right now than you would expect, most likely. But still, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, so we have our second live chat question here, which goes to "You're taking my life." And actually, several people have asked this question, and it's actually a pretty good question here. They said, "I don't understand why they found it necessary to announce this," meaning the long-range strikes into Russia, "so that way Putin could move all these strategic assets further back, and it seems kind of self-defeating." And I honestly don't know why they announced it either. And to be clear, Zelenskyy was not the one to announce this. Apparently, the call was made to Zelenskyy today to let him know that permission had been granted, but it was the United States that came out and decided to make it public, but through a press conference. So I'm not sure why they did that. It seemed like it probably would have been wise to keep that quiet, at least for the time being, so that way Ukraine could have the chance to actually go in there and hit the things without Putin being ready for it. So I don't understand it, and I don't think a lot of people understand it either. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say, in my opinion, it doesn't really make a lot of sense for them to make public statements like that. It's just something that I would have to be honest, I don't get why they do that. They've done that at every single turn, and I feel like that's a part of Zelenskyy really not having a political background and kind of just being in show business before this, because people who have not been, like, I will say this, politicians generally are not upstanding people. Like, across the board, generally not. There are some outshining examples and exceptions to that, in my opinion, that I think are pretty good, but most of them generally are fairly two-faced, but still, at that, they have a decent amount of experience of what they should say and what they should not say, and what they should hold back. And while Zelenskyy didn't make this statement, I feel like the kind of aspect that he's brought to the Ukrainian government, which is this kind of a more show business sort of an aspect and a mindset, which y'all can see whenever he makes speeches, and they're like perfectly lighted and they got these little neat animations in them and everything. That kind of thing has kind of spread it over, especially to freaking Kirill Budanov, who acts like it's a spy movie, and he's like, "I have my master plan," and then he explains the whole thing before it happens, pretty much. Like, I don't know why they do that sometimes. This is one of the ones that I find annoying with that, because if they were given long-range permissions, they should have waited for the Russians to make a threat and then said, "We will never strike the Russians because we're scared of their threat," and then just hit them out of the blue 2 weeks later with a massive attack of ATACMS missiles and Storm Shadows and completely catch them off guard. That probably would have been the better thing to do, because that would be practicing decent deception, at least against the Russians, because the Russians would know that it's possible that they could strike these targets, but it looks like our threat was enough to stop them from doing it. Or to just say nothing and then start striking them immediately as soon as you get the permission without saying a single word. So that way they don't even have time to react or even take precautions if they were going to do that. That would be the smarter thing. I don't know why they do that sometimes. I guess it's maybe just because of inexperience, or they think it sounds cool. I'm not entirely sure, but that would be my take on it at the moment. Because when you're in the United States, you don't hear people say this. Like, you'll hear this, like the 3 U.S. soldiers that were killed at Tower 52 at Antom. It was a terrible tragedy, and the U.S. government did say we will respond at a time of our choosing, and that was it. You didn't sit there and have the Secretary of Defense right now, Lloyd Austin, come out, Matthew, and do this. Like, his eyes start glowing red. It's all drawn up to plan. The strike will commence in 24 hours. You better pray to God because we're hitting these places. It's like, he didn't do that. They just started bombing them out of the blue, and it literally came as a shock to everyone. It's like, that's how it should be done. I don't know why they do it the other way. And also, like, that kind of, like, it annoys me a little bit because they'll do something like that, which honestly is an amateur folly. Like, because the Ukrainian, I'll say this, the Ukrainians, as far as fighting on the ground, do exceptionally well against the Russian Federation. But when sometimes in the government circles they do something like that, it is an amateur's folly. You shouldn't be saying stuff like that. Like, if you are going to respond, you can say something like, that's not going to fly and we'll have to respond, but you don't go into any further detail than that until it happens. And so,
typically, if you're announcing something ahead of time, either you're bluffing or you're trying to test the enemy's response to what their response is going to be to whatever action you're taking. And all the times that Ukraine has gone out there and announced, like, oh, we're going to do X, Y, and Z on this date, they're really not testing the Russians' response because they already know what the response is going to be. And they're also not bluffing because sometimes they'll actually pull off exactly what they said they were going to do. And everybody's like, well, wait a minute. Well, why'd you say that? The Russians literally moved people into place to get ready for you to do that. And then you actually did it. You weren't bluffing. So I've never understood why they do that, honestly. I just don't understand it. There's really not much to say about it. It's just, it really doesn't make sense.
I don't know either. I feel like it's an amateur's folly sort of a thing with that, because it's just silly to do that. Like, I don't know why. I don't know. This is the one that drives me crazy. Was when they were getting ready to do the Southern Offensive of 2023 in the summer. And they sat there and Kirill Budanov said, we're going to make the skies turn gray with our shells. Be ready, Russia. We're coming for you. Like, literally just like 3 days before the offensive began. And then they put out that cringe video where they had everyone going, shh, like for like 2 minutes. It's like, stop. It's like, just stop. Like, if the OPSEC thing isn't secure, don't let them know. Just do it. Like, just get out there and start the offensive.
It'd be like the same thing as me going in the chat right now, like saying something specifically to a viewer. Like, for example, let's say Duncan VR in the live chat. I go in there and be like, at Duncan VR, don't tell anybody this, but I like the animal noises. Don't tell anybody. It's like literally like 10,000 people just saw the message in the live chat, and we're going to pretend like nobody saw it. It's like the same level of goofiness.
It is. It really is. That's all I can say about it. That's one thing that I do have to scathe the Ukrainian government for without question. Of course, we're pro-American and pro-Western, and that means that we're pro-Ukraine. But sometimes some things that they do are just so goofy, you have to point them out. And I got to be honest with y'all, I got a bone to pick with, I think, the goofiest person in the Ukrainian government, which is Kirill Budanov. I don't know why he always comes out and just says stuff to literally expose everything that they're about to do. He's the spy chief, and he'll just say something like, in a couple of days, Russia's really going to feel it in the Kursk Oblast. And, like, it's like, why are you saying this? Stop saying it. Like, you're just giving them heads up notice. It doesn't need to be known. This isn't a movie. Like, we're not trying to be like, oh, you haven't seen my ultra jujitsu yet, and then hit them with, like, the special karate move. We're not doing that. This is real life. You got to just shut up and let things happen when they're about to happen. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the last question in the segment, and then we're going to be getting back into the news.
All right, and also while we're at it, huge shout out to Chris Kelly, by the way, who threw in a $100 donation to the fundraiser and brought us up to $3,769. Nice on the fundraiser, and huge shout out to Chris Kelly for that generosity. And moving on here to our last question, this one is going to go to Doug Halstead, who says, is there a U.S. weapons system that we have here in the U.S. that would help Ukraine the most?
We've generally provided everything that we can give to them at this point without violating national security interests as far as proprietary military technology. But if we were to give them anything extra, there really is nothing left. No joke. We've practically given them everything in every category that we can that wouldn't violate national security interests. So I'll be honest with you, we pulled out all the stops. Like, there are some things like an aircraft carrier or maybe a THAAD or something like that. But the reality is we're never giving them that, and we should never give them anything like that, because that's literally our cutting edge military technology, and we pumped hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions over years, to develop and field these weapon systems that are practically brand new, and they're vital to national security interests. So I would have to say there's literally nothing that we can give them. I want to make this fairly clear. I'm not a fan of some things. Like, this may be a bit of a hot take to some, maybe logical to others. It will be logical to people with any background in the military or any background in the government or national security, but giving Ukraine the most modern and advanced stuff that we have is an absolutely ridiculous notion. Like, most of our allies don't even get the most advanced stuff that we have. In fact, they don't. Like, Britain gets a watered down version of the F-35. Like, when they're buying them, they get the F-35, I believe it's the F-35A. No, actually, I think it's the F-35B, but they also have a older or different computer systems mounted into the system or the aircraft, so that way they're not up to the complete and modernized American spec that we have. And that's specifically because the computer technology that the United States has is proprietary. It gives us a cutting edge over everyone, and it costs a lot of money to develop it. And for this reason, we don't want that to even have a higher chance or a slight possibility in falling into someone else's hands like the Russians or the Chinese. And that's not to say that the British are untrustworthy. It's just to say, if this system is in another country's hands or another military's hands than ours, it is increasing the chance that this proprietary technology and information can start to spread quicker. And that's what we're trying to avoid. And so whenever I hear anyone saying we should give F-35, like U.S. Air Force F-35s to Ukraine, or a THAAD, or anything else, I find that to be preposterous, because that is maybe helping Ukraine a little bit, but it's greatly damaging the United States. Because if for some reason an F-35 was used wrongly, which I'll be honest with y'all, there's a decent chance it probably would be, it ends up getting shot down over the Russian side, and then the Russians get to sit there and comb through the wreckage and pick it apart and figure out exactly how an F-35 works. That is a massive risk to the United States and its national security. It's a massive risk to our warfighting abilities around the world, because it allows our adversaries a very prime time chance and an opportunity anytime something like that would happen to be able to pick apart any tech that we have that is way advanced than theirs by decades, and to figure out exactly how it works and what its weaknesses are. And so whenever I see people out there on the internet who will say things like, oh, I want to give Ukraine like a Nimitz class aircraft carrier, I'm like, are you out of your freaking mind? Because that just doesn't make any sense. Like, yes, you can support Ukraine and you could give them more. Sure, I'm not against that at all, but not our modern and advanced tech, the stuff that's still being used. We can give them M1As, M1A1s, we can give them M109s, we can give them M777s, we can give them the Excalibur and Copperhead rounds, we can give them ATACMS, we can give them HIMARS, we can give them all that stuff. This is from the 80s. We hardly are using it anymore, or it's being retired and replaced by something else completely at this point. We can give them all that stuff, but we can't give them our best, because at that point, we're jeopardizing the entire nation at that point. I'm all for American and Western interests, but at that point, we're going so far into supporting our strategic interests in Europe, we're jeopardizing our security interests long-term permanently. And so I hope that does address that fairly well and get that out there, because I generally don't have a lot of respect for people who would jeopardize the security aspect in the United States just to support Ukraine in the short term. Like, all for supporting Ukraine, but not at the complete detriment of the United States entirely. That makes no sense at that point, and it's a net negative. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least as a side note there. But with that, we are now going to be moving on into our location unknowns, and we actually have some fairly interesting ones tonight, as we were able to see that a grad launcher was destroyed. And check this out. Oh, there goes one of them. Oh my god.
Oh, it graduated to a fireball nuke.
Man, that thing was a mini nuke, man. And oh, look, a second one. Oh, and that one didn't blow up. It's just toasting quite nicely. And they hit another grad. That one didn't really explode, but it did catch on fire, of course.
You know, the way they hit these grads is inspirational.
Oh, what? Was someone jumping off of the back of that thing, dude? Oh my god, there was someone leaping from the back of the grad. Look at that.
I believe I can fly.
Dude, that guy was flying, man. Dang.
He flew right into the dirt.
Man, right into the doit. Oh, also, by the way, folks, today is day 998. And I also want to remind you all that when we are on air next time on a live stream on Tuesday, this upcoming week, it is going to be day 1000 of the war. I wanted to remind you all of that because, at least according to what we have right now, it's going to be the first time ever that we're going to be covering a day that is 4 digits long in terms of how long the war's been going on. And not only that, we hopefully, according to the timetables we have in the background, will have our brand new orchestrated armed forces medley ready for the show that day. It'll be the first day that's available. I'm sure many of y'all are saying, well, don't you have that right now? And yes, we do, but it's actually the very, very rough draft version of the song. I'm sure many of y'all were around a little while ago when we were playing the orchestration of it, or at least one of the very rough draft orchestrations, but currently it's in the hands of a sound mixer, and they are getting the final mix done for it to be ready for the show, which should be done by tomorrow or by early Tuesday before our show. So by the time we go live on air that day, we should have the Armed Forces medley entirely done. It's been a massive project spanning the course of about 4 months and about $5,000, but it is finally done. So that is going to be our day 1000 gift to every single one of y'all, is the brand new track. And so with that, I hope we addressed that fairly well, incredibly well, as a matter of fact. And we're now moving on to our next bit of location unknowns, where we got to see a loaf with a cup cage, Bliet.
Oh, Bliet, it's a loaf. Yes. What is that on top of it? Is that electronic warfare equipment?
Honestly, man, it looks like those buckets you use at the beach to make sandcastles, but it is an electronic warfare system. I'm not lying.
That's their mobile vodka mixing buckets, I guess. They just have that sitting on top for convenience.
Man, they sit there and say, man, the enforcer might have a mixer Bliet, but we have a real mixer Bliet. And then they put, like, a freaking grog into that thing up there and drink it.
Moscow Mule.
man, I want another Moscow Mule Bliet or Roman... Well, actually, that's...
Bring out Lavrov. Bring him out, that Moscow Mule.
Man, let me bring him out, man. Let me bring him out right here. Wait, hang on, man. Let me get it correct. Man, it's
There we go.
hilarious.
Look at
Oh God, dude, it's horrendous.
We will not give up territory, but I will settle on an apple.
Man, dude, this face. Oh my God.
Oh, dear Lord.
Oh my God.
Oh goodness.
Dude.
Put us on the hit list. We're on there for sure.
Dude, I'm about to turn into a freaking Quagmire over here and go, oh God, or something like that. Like it's that bad. No, man, no giggity on that one, man. Like no diddy, no giggity.
Anti-giggity.
Man, dude, but the hot dog man though would be like, oh man, for real? Honestly though, this guy does look a little bit better than hot dog man because he doesn't have that giant hole in his scalp. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, man. Like, yeah, you have like, let's see, different levels here. I'm not sure who would be above Lavrov. I'd have to give that some thought. Maybe like Xi, then Lavrov, and then Hot Dog Man somewhere down there in the F tier.
And then even lower than that are those AI images that he uses, Matthew, on everything to make himself look like a Chad. That's probably even lower than that because that is so cringe. You know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about, man. On that gaming channel, dude, he tries to make himself look like an ultra fit hero, and I'm like, just stop. Like it shows how insecure the guy is about how he even looks. Like, he's not a good looker. You know, he looks like some sort of a bulldog, no joke. But it's like still just accepted. Like, I'm a bit of a chubby, you know, like I accept it. I get in front of the camera. I know that I could use an extra donut. Like, I'm not going to lie. I know that 100%. I'm not going to sit there though and chatify myself in an AI generator. That makes no sense. But still, Lavrov.
You do remember though when Lavrov, speaking of Lavrov, like something that happened recently with him, he was sitting somewhere at some diplomatic event. Somebody walked by and stepped on his toe. Yeah, stomped on his foot and then made him jump out of his chair. Let me see if I can find the video of that because y'all would find that hilarious. Let me see. I don't think we actually showed that on our stream. I want to pull it up and see it again, man. I got to see this. Let's see. Step foot. Let's see if it's there. Let's see. Come on, please be there, please. Okay, there it is. Okay, repost. It's on the top of our Twitter page. Hopefully Twitter's working.
All right, sweet. Hopefully Twitter is working. Let me see if it's working. Oh, it's working quick now. Dude, yeah, it's server issues. Whew, thank the Lord, though. But, there it is. Yeah.
Let's see. All right. He freaked out, too.
Man, he went, and like it did.
Great heavens.
Oh, great heavens.
Man, the other guy acted like he was going to jump up and throw hands or something over there on the right. Did you see him? He jumped up like he was going to do something.
Wait, let me see here.
Watch. Oh, he said,
Man,
Man, he was so flustered by that too. He was like, "Somebody stepped on my foot. Oh my god, I can't believe this. This is the worst thing to happen."
Dude, it's like a horse hearing a gunshot, man. He sat there like, something like that.
Plot twist: she pulled an apple out of her pocket, and he said, "Oh wait, is that an apple?"
Dude, he saw a sugar cube fall into his lap right there, and he went, "Oh!" And like he had to look up and see who gave it to him, bro. He's dude. After this meeting here, they actually brought him out back to the stable and started to comb him with like the horsehair brush, and then also started to sweep up the shit from the floor. You know, it was like a whole equestrian sort of a event after this little brick summit right here. But moving on from that though, and that whole riff on Lavrov, we are certainly going to die if we ever go to Russia. Like we're going to land and there's like the airport's going to explode. Like no joke. But moving on,
it's gonna be a slow one too, man. They're gonna put us through the ringer,
dude. We are going to land at this airport right up here. Like if we ever went to Russia, we're going to land at this one, the Pushkin International Airport. They're going to take us like and put us immediately on those torture racks where they like spread out your arms and legs, and they're just going to drag us behind pickups down the highway straight to the Kremlin. Like that's what they're going to do. That would 100% be what would happen. So that's why we're never going to Russia. That's generally why we're going to stay in America for the rest of our lives, because here in America, we know that things are good. Life is good. And we love the amazing Republic of the United States of America and our intelligence forces who are always watching the show every single night. Hats off to y'all. Y'all do great work. And
I love America.
And we, as we say off air, we love our personal feds. They're like our guardian angels. Big shout out to the feds. Moving on from that, though, that's probably like the first time anyone in America has ever said that, Matthew. Like, big shout out to the feds. A big shout out to the feds. They keep us safe. But moving on from that and into the location unknowns, we were able to see some Russian losses, and the Russian losses were sick.
Oh my goodness.
1.6.
Damn it. Well, the losses went down. What the hell? But no, like seriously, that's some pretty high losses right there. It's actually at 1,640 right there. But also 2 Bobcats. Like that's not crazy, but it's good. I like to see it.
Man, let's see here though. Like this, you know, in Europe, Matthew, from what I've seen on their currency, they never use the dot. They always use the comma to, you know, make the differentiation in between whole dollar units and cents. And so, well, whole euro units and then their version of cents. And so this, at least in a European metric, would be like 1.6. So according to the Kyiv Independence casualty report today, there was 1 whole Russian soldier that was wounded or killed, and then there was Lieutenant Dan. But nevertheless, the losses were pretty significant. As we were able to see that Ms. Deesa, the keeper of the records, was able to clarify this great discrepancy in the record today, as it was actually 1,640 Russian soldiers that were wounded and killed over the past 24 hours, which is the 9th highest troop loss in the entirety of the war. And the new weekly average is 1,713 troops lost per day, and a total of 11,990 lost every week. But moving on from that, we were able to see that 1,640 Russian soldiers were wounded and killed, along with 27 ABCs, 85 supply trucks, 12 main battle tanks, 36 artillery pieces, 60 drones, 2 2 Bobcat skid-steers. Overall, it was a pretty good day. Very nice to see. We're going to be moving on from the location unknowns and on into the area of the Vovchansk front, where we're able to see a Russian showing his positions today and letting us know that things are not that well, and he's wishing that the war would end soon. And here's the clip. Yippee! And so here we are. We see him wandering around. We can see the paint chipping off the walls, and it looks like a beautiful day out there in Vovchansk. He's looking through rebar. Wait, man, let me get that usual like dementia music that they put on the memes.
Yeah. Put on that like depressing, like terrible music. Like just pull that up and play it to this track.
Man, I wish I could. I think it's copyrighted though, no joke.
Oh yeah, it probably is. They like to put that copyright on everything.
Defender Marcy said, "Are you okay, Andy?" Well, Andrew actually. I was doing the Michael Jackson thing. "Are you okay, Andy?" But yeah, I'm pretty good. I was just doing that really quickly to get on through it.
Вот моя позиция. О, откуда-то летит миномет. Вот с той стороны.
Where the hell is he, man? A prison or something?
Он с той стороны.
Former gulag.
Наши союзники. Ну, понятно, все разбито.
I used to sit in this corner, you know, this corner of the cell. Yes, this was my cell right here. I cooked ramen with the electrical in the corner.
You see, the walls are actually this nice black color. Some people asked us, "Oh, that's a beautiful paint. What kind of paint is it?" I told them it was black mold. Or something like that.
Находится у меня позиция
He said, have
в
you ever gotten
больнице
high on black
здания.
mold? Me neither, but I'm going to try.
I'm gonna huff this shit until the wall's
Oh,
white
man, I
again.
tell you, it doesn't work well. Don't try it.
Aw, man. I sat there and smoked a roach, and then I tried to huff it, and it did nothing for me. It's so weak. Aw, man, I get that extra sticky galaxy gas. Aw, man.
Оно было 4- или 5-этажное. Осталось только 2. Ну, не считая подвала. Но это я видео скидывал уже там. Видно. Так что...
Little fella
I'm sure
just
this Switch
giving us...
really looked good, you know, even before it got hit.
I'm not really sure. It's a good question, though.
Вот с этого вот окошечка я работаю по хохлам. Отстреливаю, чтобы они не прорывались. Ублюдки. Фашисты. Ну вот с чего я работаю.
He's wrapped this AK so much, it's unrecognizable. Suppressor is Garbo.
Ну,
Oh, look, 2 more. They really do not maintain the AKs at all, man. They always look like they're screaming for sweet release.
What are the odds that that's not thermal stuff wrapped around the suppressor and it's going to cook right onto it?
Dude, it's actually going to just catch on fire. Like, it's that bad.
Melt some
винторез.
lovely, a nice textile into the suppressor.
Крупнокалиберный
Oh, what's that?
пулемет.
Looks like a grenade. Oh, actually, it looks like an ATGM mount. And there's the ATGM right there, actually. So I called that one right. Oh, and look, RPG warheads right there, too, in just one room. So that way when it gets hit, it blows up tremendously. Look at all of these bricks, Bliet. Aw,
там
man.
еще.
Kind of looks better than my
О,
apartment.
есть, кстати,
Oh, look, they got the double barrel. They whipping out the old coach. Get him, coach. Do it, coach. You know what you're doing, coach. I'm going to trade stocks. Or something like that.
He's not insider trading. It's called getting an edge.
Магазинов.
This ain't called insider trading. This is called a Hail Mary to touchdown zone. Damn.
Здесь автомат.
Hail Mary, 1 million.
Ну и вот там вдалеке Волчанск. Ну как вдалеке, все рядом.
This guy's just yapping, too.
Так что
Man, if you were like me, I'm gonna represent you well. I'm gonna represent you as I'm slinging stocks. Damn it, like something like
выход
that.
миномета опять.
Oh, man.
Главное, чтобы не по нам. Ну а так что, работаем. Держимся.
This guy looks like a ghoul
Надеемся.
wandering around in here.
Надеемся на
What are you looking at, smooth skin? Ever seen a ghoul before? Like,
то, что все-таки когда-то это закончится и вернемся домой живыми и невредимыми.
dude, you know he looks like Bubbles from the Trailer Park Guys or something like that.
I never watched that show. I've never heard of the Trailer Park Guys.
I've never heard of it either, but I've seen the memes, and I'm like, that guy kind of looks like him. That's seeing the clip, though, and just showing a little bit of what Vovchansk looks like these days. Moving on from that, though, into Orsk-Pokrovsk, we did get to see another T-90M being destroyed by the Ukrainians as they play dramatic piano music. Oh, my lord.
Oh.
Run,
look,
Bliet.
they're stumbling away. They're all wearing reflective. Is that reflective stuff they're wearing?
Reflective white tape.
Stupid.
Quick, guys, put on your camouflage. It's supposed to make you blend in with the background. And now let's put on this white reflective tape that they use on the roads, Bliet. It's like a genius. But there they go. And now they're going to knock out the T-90M.
There's abandoning those buttes like they're disposable paper.
And to them, they are. But to the Russian government, they aren't. But moving on from that clip and into the next one, we also got to see more Russians getting slammed by the 92nd in this area as well. He don't know the Trailer Park Boys? I don't know the Backstreet Boys either. They're just a group of people, I suppose. But we can see them here getting slammed. Not the Backstreet Boys, but the 92nd Brigade.
Man, the Backstreet Boys getting slammed. Oh god.
Actually, though, in real life, at least if you're in downtown in most cities, it's actually the Backstreet Boys who are doing the slamming. You see, it's the other way around. But that's the end of the clip right there, and nice to see the 92nd Brigade doing their work. That joke fell flatter than a pancake, but we also got to see some Russians.
Clap.
Huh? Please clap. But we also got to see some Russians getting captured just outside of Pokrovsk. They literally just drove in, like, in the middle of a Ukrainian unit, and they just came out and treated them like the cops. You're like, put your hands up and get out on the ground. It's like, all right.
They must have thought this was McDonald's or something. They're not serving up Big Macs.
And we see them dragging them around. That one Ukrainian just poked the other in the butt with the muzzle brake of the, the compensator of the 74 right there.
They have enough people in that, man?
I think they do. Man, it's like a local police department. They got like 30 guys on the case here. Like, it's like they're all just hanging out. That guy down there, he's just making noises, man. He's just going, It's like, calm down, dude. Oh. I don't sound happy, but moving on from that, maybe one of the first times I've ever seen the Ukrainians treating Russian prisoners badly on tape, at least recently. We're now going to be moving on into Novoselevsky, where we were able to see Russian forces getting slammed in this direction. We're going to be muting the sick trap beats. Y'all know they're coming. Yeah, see, we're going to be muting that. See, that's just not good. But, oh, they took down a Russian drone right there. Ole mole. Oh my goodness. We now see them flying another drone into another Russian dugout.
Also, none of your beeswax said it. War crime, abuse of prisoners. I'm going to say this. I'm going to be fair. Like, honestly, they should, like, the Ukrainians should have a word with that guy, the specific one kicking the prisoners like that, because apparently the Russians did surrender. So you don't want to have footage going around showing, prisoners getting kicked like that, because that might deter future Russians from actually surrendering, thinking, oh, crap, if we get captured, we're going to get kicked. And then when the cameras get turned off, it's going to get worse. So, no, they should really, like, make sure they tend to that, because that's not a good look.
Yeah, I would agree. Also, I'm seeing some people saying, let's see, some people are trying to justify it. I just want to say this really quickly. Someone said that wasn't abuse. Yes, kicking someone while they're down in the ribs, that's usually considered some form of abuse. You see, if a police officer arrested you and had you down on the ground and then kicked you really hard in the ribs, you'd actually have a reason to say that that was a unjust use of force by the police. Generally, when someone surrenders, you're not supposed to just sit there and start using them as a punching bag like you're preparing to actually give a real fight, unlike Mike Tyson and Jake Paul. You're actually supposed to just, process them and get them to a POW camp. That is a technical war crime right there, and some people are trying to downplay that, but when the Russians do the same thing, everyone's really apt to say it's a war crime. Now, I'm generally fair across the board. When the rules of war are put into play, there's no interpretations there to where a Russian kicking a Ukrainian is unacceptable, but a Ukrainian kicking a Russian's all right. The rules of war are the same across the board, so that is technically a war crime. Also, someone said, was he armed? No, because he had his hands taped behind his back, and he was face down on the ground getting kicked, so... Also,
even though the Russians may deserve it as well, like, I can understand why the Ukrainians would want to kick them. At the same time, though, the point is the Ukrainians are fighting for the Western values, basically, like, justice and things like that. The Russians, we know what they're fighting for. They're fighting for disorder and things like that in the Putin thug regime. You don't want to stoop down to that level, even though I understand why they're doing it and why they would want to do it. Honestly, here's another thing, just being realistic. Why is that on camera? Like, why is somebody filming that? Maybe the guy kicking did not know that was on camera, but even if it wasn't being filmed, they shouldn't do that anyway.
Also, I saw someone else say, let's see here. Saw someone say, I want to make sure. Let's see. Someone said police and military are different. You're right, actually. They are different, but the comparison was still to make a point that, once someone's in some form of custody with their hands tied behind their back, it's generally not a good principle to start kicking them in the ribs. Like, that just isn't something that you do. But another thing is that in some instances, the military and the police are different, yes. But in some instances, it's actually far less restrictive on the police than it is in the military. Like, example, for the police in riot control situations, they can easily use CS gas or tear gas on an unruly crowd. In war, using any form of tear gas or CS gas is chemical warfare and entirely unacceptable. Like, that's a bit of a difference right there. And so with that, I hope that does address that well, or at least kind of once again lay out that doesn't mean, oh, well, the military, it's like a lot less restrictive. It actually is much more restrictive in some instances and not in others. But moving on from that and into the next clip, which is in Chernopopivka, we were able to see some Russians getting slammed in this area. And also someone said, who are we to judge? Well, we are the people who are supporting the Ukrainians in this war, and we're just people. Like, I don't think you have to be a U.S. Army soldier in Vietnam to say that the My Lai massacre wasn't exactly a good thing. Like, who am I to judge? Well, I'm a rational human being, so got a good reason to judge that kicking someone with their hands bound behind their back isn't exactly a great thing. Exactly like when the Russians do it to Ukrainian prisoners, that's not a great thing either. There's
And also, to be fair though, like, we haven't really seen that hardly ever on camera of the Ukrainians doing that whatsoever. And it was just one guy in the video doing it. It was not like the whole group of Ukrainians, like, beating up the guy like simultaneously. It was just that one guy getting out of hand. So you got to remember, it's kind of like police officers a little bit. If one police officer is in a group of other police officers and then one does something bad to like a prisoner, they're all a little bit hesitant to say, hey, you don't do that, because it's kind of like a clique or I don't want to say a gang, because the police officers aren't really a gang, but it's like a clique, and they don't really want to speak out and say, hey, don't do that, because you kind of go against the group. And I think the same thing's happening with the Ukrainians right there in that video, but it was one small little incident, so not a crazy big deal, but still, they should watch that.
Yeah, and we can also see right here is Stugna slamming into a Russian vehicle. And I do have to agree, we don't see that a lot, but at the same time, it shouldn't be happening hardly at all. Whenever it's seen, it should be curtailed. Because that's when you start running into situations like sometimes in America, when people liked it when the cops were rough on folks, and then the cops, in some instances, get a little too rough on folks, and then people want to go, whoa, hey, that's crossing the line. Although everyone wanted them to cross the line about 30 years ago or so in almost every single situation. It's kind of like that. You got to nip it in the bud whenever you see things being done wrong. And then I also saw someone say, well, they were just fighting them minutes ago. They're lucky to even be alive. Are you like, wait, I want to make sure here, because this is someone who's been around for a while. I don't know if I'm understanding this correctly, but are you saying that they shouldn't take prisoners and they should have just executed them on the spot and they're lucky that they're just getting kicked? Because if so, that means that retroactively, you would also have to go back and say that every time the Russians have ever abused or killed a Ukrainian prisoner of war, that's entirely acceptable, because the Ukrainians were just fighting the Russians a few minutes ago, and so it was entirely acceptable that the Russians would vent their frustrations on them and just beat them or shoot them. When it comes to this kind of stuff, when it comes to diplomacy, it's entirely fine to be unfair to the other side, because that's in the end in our interests. But when it comes to actually fighting a war, there are supposed to be set rules and standards that are laid out by the Geneva Conventions and largely the rules of war that are supposed to be respected by all sides. And the abuse of prisoners is something that is it's supposed to be entirely unacceptable according to the rules. That's not something open to interpretation. That's just the fact. Every time the Russians do it, it's a war crime. And any one of the times one of the few times we see the Ukrainians do it, that's a war crime, and that person should be held accountable or have some sort of punishment brought on them by their command for doing something like that, because it's a violation of the rules of war. And if the Ukrainians want to put themselves forward, which they have been the entire war, as reasonable and civilized, they should be following the rules of war as reasonable and civilized folks. That one person is an outlier. Generally, they do that all the time, though. But moving on from that, we were able to see an FPV drone being finished off by the Brazilian volunteers inside the Kremlin forest.
It's like a Jurassic Park thing.
Yeah, look at it. It's just sitting out there. So how they're going to deal with it is just going to lob a grenade at it. And there goes the grenade. my
man.
lord.
That was close.
That is crazy right there. And with that, that's the end of the clip, but still very interesting to see. And moving on from that and down into the area of Touretsk, we were also able to see some infantrymen fighting around the area of the Touretsk front. Also, really quickly, I do have to say this. If I see folks saying that the torture of prisoners is acceptable, or the mistreatment of prisoners is acceptable in the chat, I'm sorry, that's not something that we're going to be able to have here. Like, I understand if people want to say maybe they get it, but saying that that's something entirely acceptable, in fact, they're lucky that the Ukrainians didn't even do worse to them, that is supporting war crimes. Like, that's just how it goes. Like, if anyone came in here and said they like the Russians doing that to the Ukrainians, they're obviously banned because they're pro-Russian. But I'm not going to have people in the chat trying to spurn forward some sort of an idea that this channel supports war crimes. That's just not going to be accepted. So if any statements like that are made, I'm sorry, but I don't think this channel is going to be for you if we see that from this point forward. But moving on from that and into the rest of the clip that we have, we were able to see the Azov fighting around the Touretsk area earlier today. And we're going to be muting the music, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, because that was a sick beat.
Yeah, that was actually a pretty good one. It sounded like a movie trailer almost.
Whoa, Jack. We've got someone in here talking about long live Russia. I'm sorry, but
Get them out of here.
You have got to go, good sir. Bad sir. Oh, look, the one person, I saw one person earlier, none of your beeswax, who actually made the original statement about it, and I've commented on it. Apparently, he was a soldier. He said, I had to take prisoners in the war. We treated them humanely because we wanted them to know they could surrender and not have to fight to the death. That's a really good point. Also, apparently you are a soldier, so you know better, way better than I do. So that is actually proving the point. And also just from a common sense perspective, you don't want to film, kicking them and then post it and then the Russians see it, because the Russians will see that video eventually. And, it's like, first of all, it shouldn't be kicking the prisoners. It's against the rules. Number two, you were really goofy for filming it. That's really where you messed up, was filming the thing and then posting it. That has more damage.
Yeah. And also, we can see here more Russian prisoners that have been taken by the Azov near Touretsk. And from what we can tell, I once again want to go over this and show they were processing prisoners here. And let's go over this again and show this. They just have them hanging out. Like, they're not beating them or anything, or kicking them. They're treating them humanely. This is the way that prisoners are supposed to be treated in war. And I know a lot of people are going to say war is hell and all that, but at the same time, there are rules of war, because while war is hell, there's supposed to be a little bit of humanity and civility that shines through the darkness and makes a little bit of a silver lining to the dark clouds of war, and this is what it's supposed to be. You can see them bounding them very calmly in this situation, nothing extremely erratic or wild. The Azov in this clip, by the way, literally had stormed their positions on film and then took them as prisoners. So they had been literally just seconds ago in the midst of the fighting and then ended up taking these guys as prisoners and did it fairly humanely. This is exactly a role model of how really every soldier on all sides is supposed to be treating prisoners of war and processing them to then send them back to a POW camp. But that's the end of that clip right there, and very interested to see some of the fighting happening within the Touretsk area. But moving on from that and down to progress, we were also able to see the Ukrainians hitting more Russian forces in this area. And what the hell is that, dude? Is that a Chinese ATV? Dude, they are drifting.
It's drifting, man. That thing is spinning tires right there. All these guys are finished. Oh, they didn't even jump.
I know.
They
didn't even jump. I think they got it. I think they got it bad, too. But moving on down to Mykolaiv on the Pokrovsk front, we also got to see more Russians getting hit by the 109th Muramasa drone unit. Also, Matthew, I want to make a note. There has been absolutely no lag tonight on my end at all.
Yeah, I don't know why that is. Like, I was trying to figure out what's different tonight. I'm still running everything as normal on my computer, and it's showing the same things on the activity monitor, about 20 gigs of RAM being used on my 48. So nothing's changed. I'm just thinking maybe it's Discord, because last night Discord was having problems. We confirmed that. And tonight I haven't seen any issues out of Discord. So hell if I know, man. It seems like it's just switching every night.
Yeah, maybe Discord's just working tonight, maybe, because everything else works just fine. But still, we can see the drone from the 109th slamming down right into the front of this 4320 here. Actually, that's a Gaz. That's not a Ural. But it took it out. And now we can see them moving on to a building that's burning on the side of the street.
I think it was Discord, Andreas. I think it was. Thankfully, I hope it's Discord because, you know, I just got this new MacBook here, and I was thinking, surely I'm not going to return my MacBook because it's not, like, supporting Discord and 2 tabs being open on my computer. That would be disappointing. But luckily, it doesn't appear to be a MacBook, so it's saved. My MacBook is safe.
And that is wonderful to hear. Incredible to hear, even. And so moving on from that and down into the area of Robotene, we were also able to see the Ukrainians hitting Russian positions in this area as well. Check it out. Also, by the way, this news segment has been going on for a hot minute. It's going into 2 hours and 10 minutes almost at this point. Probably by the time we get done with the speech, it will have. So this is a record-length news segment tonight, but still very fun. And also, we've raised nearly $4,000 for Nova Ukraine, so that is also great as well.
Man, it's like a bonus for like hitting that goal so fast. Extra news.
Man, additional news. Long-lasting news. And I love to hear that there's no lag, because hopefully that makes it a lot more enjoyable for y'all. And so we can see that the Ukrainian drones are just doing amazing work, incredible work, long-lasting work.
Also, by the way, just because Margaret asked and I saw an opportunity here, I got to take it. Margaret said, MacBook Pro? Yes. When we had the lag issues and nothing else was fixing it, I'm like, okay, this is like very important to make sure the stream runs smoothly for y'all. So I had to go out and trade in my old MacBook and get the new one. And I got the M4 Max, which is the fastest processor with the 40-core GPU. So super fast. I was like, this has got to fix the problem. And then last night, Discord started acting up, and I was thinking, oh my God, I think the new computer made it worse. But thankfully, it seems to be just Discord. But yeah, so far, the computer's really good. I like it, and it seems to be fixing the problem.
So far, so good. And also moving down quickly to Israel, we did get to see a failed Iron Dome interceptor around Eilat, which we saw on clip in several today. But you see the Iron Dome missile here actually failing pretty much immediately and slamming back down below.
Yo, did you see that bomb flying through the air, though?
Man, I did, though. And that's the Iron Dome that slammed down over there. We see it right here as well. And moving on into the last clip that we have of this, we were able to see it from another angle here. The missile arches back down. Some sort of propellant failure, most likely. Very unfortunate. We don't know if there was any wounded or killed in this incident, but a very unfortunate failure of the Iron Dome at the port of Eilat just this night. But moving on out of that and up back into Ukraine, it's now time for us to get to the speech from President Volodymyr Zelenskyy here on day 998 of the war. And so, without further ado, here is the speech. Speech!
Give me a speech, please. Give me a speech. I would like speech. 3 minutes and 33 seconds. I love that. 333.
Wonderful, long-lasting.
Дорогі українці, українки, сьогодні був один з найбільших та найбільш небезпечних за всю війну російських ударів. 210 дронів і ракет одразу, в тому числі гіперзвукова та аеробалістичні. Більшість цілей, на щастя, вдалося збити. Мішенню для Росії була саме енергетика, критична інфраструктура. І це відповідь усім, хто хотів чогось досягти з Путіним розмовами, телефонними дзвінками, обіймами, умиротворенням. Сьогодні цей голуб миру надіслав нам чергові кинджали та калібри. Ось така дипломатія. Його мова – це підлість. Росія вже майже 1000 днів робить одне те й саме. І від цього треба захищатись, треба бути сильними. Час інвестувати треба не у те, щоб поговорити з кимось в Москві, а щоб дійсно змусити Росію до закінчення війни. Я дякую всім нашим воїнам ППО, повітряних сил, мобільним вогневим групам, кожному і кожній, хто забезпечує українську можливість збивати все це російське зло. Сьогодні знов блискуче проявили себе патріоти, непогано проявили себе F-16, є збиття ракет. Окрема вдячність всім партнерам, які допомагають нам з системами і протиракетами. Це дійсно глобальна справа. Щоразу, коли відбуваються такі російські удари, ми бачимо, як важливо, що партнери не залишають патріоти та інші системи десь там на складах, а передають їх саме тим людям, хто вміє захищати життя і потребує цього. Ми зараз ще не отримали від партнерів всіх потрібних систем, але працюємо далі. Коли цей результат буде, відбиття атак стане більш повним. В 4 областях зараз тривають відновлювальні роботи. Вранці більше 1 мільйона абонентів були відключені від електрики. Зараз кількість значно менше. Я дякую всім ремонтним бригадам. Роботи триватимуть цілодобово. На жаль, від російського удару сьогодні є поранені. У Львівській області, в Києві, на Полтавщині, в Дніпровщині, Одеській області, в Запорізькій області. Усім надано необхідну допомогу. Є й загиблі. На жаль, мої співчуття усім рідним, всім близьким. Обов'язково відповімо окупанту. І ми повинні витримати тиск зараз. Будь-який тиск, будь-які удари, щоб наступного року досягти свого, щоб досягти миру. І ще одне. План посилення України – це план перемоги, який я представив партнерам. Одним з головних пунктів є далекобійність для нашої армії. Сьогодні багато в медіа говорять про те, що ми отримали дозвіл на відповідні дії. Але удари завдають не словами. Такі речі не анонсують. Ракети самі за себе скажуть. Обов'язково. Слава Україні!
And the Hiram Slava and the missiles will speak for themselves. But beyond that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelenskyy here on day 998 of the news of the war in Ukraine. And that is moving us on into the second segment of the stream, where we get to talk to each and every single one of y'all. And it is going to be a fun segment, a long-lasting segment. Actually, it might last for about 20 minutes or so, to be entirely honest, because there is things that must be tended to tomorrow, things that will take up a decent portion of the day. But beyond that, we cannot wait to get to talk to all of y'all. And Matthew, have we had any top donors in between the last segment and this one? And if so, who are they?
Yes, and like Zelenskyy said, we're going to let the missiles speak for themselves, and we're going to let the donors speak for themselves as well, because we have a 69 nice donation from Bubba Conway. He threw that into the fundraiser and brought us up to 3,888, and also Axel K threw in a 50 and also helped bring us up to that figure right there. So huge shout out to Bubba and Axel for that generous support of the fundraiser. And also, once again, huge shout out to everybody else, because I feel like sometimes we don't give enough credit to the audience here. I know we shout out the top donors every single time, but every single Sunday we are smashing the goal, like consistently. We have never missed a fundraising goal in the history of the channel, which is insane, because we're about to be at day 1,000 and we've raised over 1.4 million. I think it might be encroaching on the 1.5 million territory any minute now, and that is crazy to see. So once again, huge shout out to the audience, and also huge shout out to Sully Canuck for putting in a 20 Canadian, and also LSA Rocks for coming in with that massive 112 and bringing us up to $4,014 raised, which is tremendous to see. But Enforcer, tell us more.
And I gotta say, impressive night I gotta thank you all so much once again for your support to this fundraiser, because we got up to $4,014. Good Lord. It's amazing right there, and we love to see it. We really do. I gotta thank y'all once again for making this fundraiser possible tonight, blowing this thing away, and of course reaching unbelievable goals and heights, because the Legion Spring Army will never die, and we will continue to do amazing things as long as the LSA exists. And so with that, I hope that this does address this incredibly well. And with that, it is time for us to move on into the questions segment. And boy, do we have many a great question. And so, Matthew, take it away.
All right, so first off, we have to grab our Morse code decoders of the stream, and tonight we had literally the entire roster that Hail Mary. And this one goes to Cliff Simonson, Mark Hodges, Earl Bernew, Kevin J., Paul Schultz, David Millsaps, Royal Fluffiness, and Arabelle Garbo. They said the Morse code says Russia having a complete mental breakdown over the missiles being approved for deep strikes in LLT, LSA.
And that's not money. Y'all got that down on the nail. That was the Morse code message of the night. I got to congratulate y'all for getting that right time and time again. Y'all been getting that right for about 920 days at this point, because that started about day 80 of the war. But I got to congratulate y'all for continuing to get that right time and time again, because y'all are truly incredible folks with that. I don't know how y'all do it, but y'all get it right every single time. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And Matthew, it is time for us to move on into the live chats. But I saw something, Matthew, and I have a hankering to talk about it tonight, Matthew. It's a live chat that I personally want to go out of my way to answer. Owen asked,
no.
Owen asked, Enforcer, what is your favorite train engine type? Well, to make it very short and to just make it very, very sweet, because I think this is one that people can get on pretty easy, it would be the EMD F7. Just naturally cool looking to me. I just think they look great in every paint job. Really cool units. They only have 1,500 horsepower each, but with an A and a B unit, they got about 3,000, so it kind of counts. But still, they're really cool. Love these to pieces. My favorite electromotive diesel out there in the world. And there's so many different colors of them. Like, look at this one. The Boston and Maine. There was Pennsylvania Railroad ones. There was literally an endless number of companies that owned these things. They were great. They were incredible, quite truly. And that's one of my favorites, to be entirely honest. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And Matthew, take us on into the next one.
All right, so jumping into our first, first live chat question here. This one is going to go to Tom Exman. He said, okay, Matt, here's a wild good question. He said, a couple of weeks ago, Ukraine was talking about developing a ballistic missile over time, and what if they struck DPRK military there?
And that's a Ukrainian ballistic missile?
Yes.
No shot. No chance. Sorry, I hate to say that, but there's no chance that they would ever be able to produce a ballistic missile that could hit North Korea. Let's just say they hit Pyongyang. That's a strike distance of 4,178 miles. They would have to produce an intercontinental ballistic missile to be able to hit the North Koreans. So with that in mind, I have a feeling that that is entirely impossible. Even if the Ukrainians develop their own ballistic missile, that one is actually much shorter in range and only is capable of firing about 550 miles, which would be about that far into Russia. So it's not going to be feasible. And so I hope that does answer the question fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and also a good question here about the authorization of new long-range strikes by not only the United States, but I see David Tablet. He's saying, is it true that the UK and also France have also authorized strikes inside the Russian Federation?
Yes. That is true. They actually did approve that today for the Scalp EG and the Storm Shadow, which were the versions of long-range missiles that they had provided to Ukraine. So as far as that's concerned, that is the case. They were also authorizing their weapons to be used today inside of Russia as well. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so real quick, I saw a question just come in that's not in our spreadsheet. This one goes to Grapefruit, who said, do you guys not worry about the U.S. pushing us near World War III?
And here's my thing, Grapefruit. Like, I understand where you're coming from by asking that, but I think you're looking at it from a little bit of an odd perspective, respectfully, because Russia is the one pushing us closer to World War III, and North Korea is also helping out with that as well by going into a fight which they don't even belong in and starting to fight against Ukraine, a sovereign country, to help out their really sick and evil buddies, which is the Russian government. They're the ones pushing us toward World War III, and we're simply responding to what the situation is that they're causing by allowing these long-range strikes into Russia. I personally think the U.S. would not have allowed those long-range strikes if it weren't for the involvement of the North Koreans. But of course, the Russians had to take it that much step further by letting the North Koreans get involved, and that's what caused the situation. So I look at it from that perspective instead of the other way around. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to agree. It's not us that's creating the problem, it's them. We're simply reacting to it. And so that's kind of like saying, you know, to the kid that's getting shoved around by a bully, are you really going to push this to a full fist fight? Like, it's like, no, I'm not the one pushing it. I'm getting shoved by this guy. I'm going to sock him in the face. Like, he's the one who started this. It's kind of like that. That's how it works to me. So it's not really the question of, is the United States pushing us into World War III? It's really, are the Russians, and the Russians are. So I hope that does address that fairly well, at least in my opinion. Good question, though, but I'm not that worried about it either, because we have that well in hand. As long as it doesn't go nuclear, it's in our ball court. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
Internet question here goes to Susan Cook, who's asking about the Chechen fella down there, Kadyrov. She said, any news on the Kadyrov blood feud, Don? It's been a while since we had the last news.
The blood feud is gone quiet, Don. We haven't heard much, Don. He's been eating ham and cheddar, Don, and thinking, Don, about what, Don, is going to be, Don, happening next, Don. And we believe, Don, that he has stopped the blood feud, Don, because of some sort of a quiet threat given to him by Putin, Don. That's my honest opinion. Like, in all, no joking, like what I said there, that's my honest opinion. I think he got a quiet threat in the background that was serious enough. He's backing off because we haven't heard anything about further escalation. So I think that story just kind of dropped off and died right there, at least from what I know. I might be wrong, though, and it might end up kicking off again in about a week or two, but for now, it looks like it's actually ended. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and M. McKernan brings up an interesting point themselves about a different topic here. They said, is the USA appeasing Ukraine with long-range permission to strike Russia because Ukraine threatened to create their own nuclear weapons?
I don't think so. I think that long-range approval was just being given to them just because the Ukrainians have made it clear that if U.S. support ends, it doesn't matter what America allows right now. If U.S. support ends, they're going to create one. That's what they said. So, in my opinion, I don't think that really weighed into this because it's that kind of a, if you want to call it a threat, that kind of a threat was on different circumstances than this one. So this wasn't a direct response to that. This was just something detached that we're doing at the moment. So I hope that does address that fairly well, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here is going to go to JC, who said, what are each of y'all's projections on when the striking of the Kerch Bridge will occur? And on my side of things, this is my prediction. I think the Ukrainians have gone out and sort of blown their OPSEC about their ambitions to strike the Kerch Bridge, and I think the Russians have bolstered their defenses around that bridge so very much that the Ukrainians are going to have a very hard time trying to hit it at this point. And remember, Budanov did say that they're going to hit the bridge by the end of 2024, and that's coming up very quickly. They only have about a month and a half left to hit the bridge, and I honestly think that Ukraine is not going to meet that deadline, and they're probably not going to be able to take it out if they even wanted to at this point, due to the Russians moving in so much air defense around the bridge. So I think that plan might have been blown to bits, but that's just my projection. But Enforcer, what say you?
Yes, this is all going according to plan. We're going to blow up the bridge at least by March.
The Russians freak out and literally set up every defense that they can before March. Well, shit. It's like, why would you do this? Why did you do it? This guy is to blame. Like, if anyone is to blame for them never hitting the Kerch Bridge from this point forward, it's this guy right here. I cannot tell y'all how much I've ended up getting to being just annoyed with this guy over the course of the war. He's the only person in the Ukrainian government that I actually just asked the question, how did he get the position? Because, like, everyone else makes sense. Alexander Syrsky was a pretty good commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. So was the fella before him, which for some reason I'm forgetting his name. No, it's Zelenskyy. It was Georgy Zelenskyy, I believe. He was another great chief of the armed forces. Every single minister of defense, Zelenskyy, they're all good at their job. And then there's this guy. There's this guy here. And then he comes out and he just literally just completely blows OPSEC, or he just says the most goofiest things ever, like the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant's blowing up tomorrow. It's literally blowing up right now, and then it doesn't blow up. Or he'll say something like, oh, we're going to get the bridge. We're going to pound it so bad. Ivan and his boys are going to be up on that tiny bridge, and they're going to be getting pounded. And then, like, the Russians freak out, and they build up a whole bunch of defenses, and then they can't hit it because it's so well defended. Like, you can't hit it with naval drones. You can't hit it with missiles hardly because they got, like, 9 pantsiers around it at this point. And there's only one way that the missiles can come in, which is pretty much over the Kerch Strait. So there's a clear line of sight towards them. So there's no way to really get them to the bridge. And, like, if anyone is to blame for the bridge never being hit, I'm throwing it on this guy. Like, 100%. I'll be honest, I don't think they're going to hit the bridge because this guy sat there and literally just said at the beginning of the year. And if y'all think I'm exaggerating about this, no, go pull up the Ukrainian Directorate of Intelligence, which is what this guy's in charge of. He literally sat there at the beginning of this year, which is almost over now, and he said, this year is going to be our year, guys. It's Ukrainian boys' summer, and we're going to blow up the Kerch Bridge. We're going to do it, on God, by March. And then the Russians freaked out, and you can literally see it on satellite picture. Over those 3 months, they literally put every single defensive element that they could around that bridge and completely removed it from being a viable target because it's just so difficult to get through the defenses at this point. It's like the only thing that's properly defended at all in the entirety of the war is that bridge now. And it's like, that's the reason why. I cannot say it enough. I went from being a pretty decent fan of the guy at the beginning of the war to this guy just stinks. Like, I think he's like the worst guy for that job. They should find someone new. I don't even know why he's still there, to be entirely honest with y'all, because, like, Zelenskyy was removed from commander-in-chief. He was a great commander-in-chief, got replaced by Syrskyi, who's also a great commander-in-chief. But then this guy sits there and he just puts out, like, rot. And he's still there 3 years later. I don't know what's up with that, but if anyone...
He's very good friends with Zelenskyy. That's the answer.
Maybe, but like... If that is the case, it's like he needs to be replaced with someone who actually knows what the Directorate of Intelligence is supposed to be. And it's not supposed to be giving intelligence to the enemy through public, like, video statements. That's an obvious thing that they should not be doing. But with that, that's my opinion. And also, I see a lot of people saying, yeah, that is kind of dumb to tell them what you're going to do. And every single time it happens, it's him. It's almost him every time. Like, it's no one else. Like, Zelenskyy doesn't. Like, he says, like, the missiles will do the talking. Budanov will be like, we're going to hit them in 48 hours. And it's like, why are you telling them this? They literally know to be ready for the next 48 hours. And what's crazy about it is that you'll think, oh, that's deception. They'll hit them in like 72 hours later or like a week later. No, they actually will launch the attack within 48 hours. So his statement was based off of real life facts. No deception involved. He literally just says it and then it happens. And it's like, why did they do that? Like, this guy, like, for this guy to be in charge of intelligence and in charge of the SBU, which largely goes around and gets people who violate OPSEC in Ukraine, this guy is like the worst at keeping OPSEC. And so...
I will say this, and honestly, like, I'm going to go ahead and address the poll real quick before I say that. But what is your opinion of Ukraine's Intel Chief Budanov? That's the question on the poll, and it's pretty across the board here. About 33% said he's a very effective Intel leader, while 33% said unsure, 14% said he's all right or acceptable, and 19% said he's a very ineffective Intel leader. And I will say this, he has made some questionable decisions about OPSEC, and I will have to zonk him for that. But at the same time, though, part of his job is very classified, and unfortunately, we will not be aware of his successes, or at least all of his successes that he has had in that role, because it is, of course, classified, and they don't talk about it in the public. So I really can't say whether or not he's super effective or not. I will say that I'm with the 14%. I think he's all right. He's acceptable. He has made some blunders, but he's also done some good things as well. So I will add this, though. Budanov is very good friends with Zelenskyy, and that is going to help him keep his job. Regardless of if he does a bad job or not, he will stay there because Zelenskyy, I believe, is, I think, longtime friends with him. And, of course, he's not going to fire his friend. That's just the way it works. But I'm with the 15%. But, Enforcer, what say you?
And also, I have to say this. A great deal of respect to pretty much everyone in the Ukrainian government. They all do a great job. Syrskyi, I would have to say, is, from what we can tell, at least in this phase of the war, as good a general, well, actually a chief of staff, or well, actually commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, as Zelenskyy was. Like, that was a pretty decent replacement to Zelenskyy. But the one guy I just have a bone to pick with is with Budanov. Like, everything that we've ever taken as a statement from Budanov that he has made publicly has been pretty much not true. The only one I can think of that he got true was that the Russians were going to blow up the Novokhovka Dam. That one actually he did get right. And like, I guess that they had actual intelligence on that, and he stated it like months before it happened, and then it happened. He was dead on the nail. But then he completely fibbed the whole Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant blowing up thing. It's a year and a half after that whole scare came around, and it did not happen. It never even got close to happening. It's still not close to happening. He's also said a whole bunch of other things that just are untrue. And also, like, I know a lot of people are like, well, he's the intelligence chief. He's supposed to be deceiving people. Yeah, but not like that. Like, if you just say things that are untrue to the public about something that the Ukrainians have done or something that has happened, that's not doing anything. Like, that's just not helping anyone. It's not deceiving the Russians either. It's doing no one any good. It's just saying stuff to say it. And then another thing that he does is he also exposes sometimes what the Ukrainians are going to be doing. And the worst one ever was when they said that the Zaporizhzhia offensive was going to be starting. They sat there, and Budanov actually came out and said, very soon the Russians will know our steel. We're going to be pushing in a place they never thought that will really hurt them bigly. Like, he said something almost along those lines, and then they put out the little video where they went, shh, and then they started the offensive like 48 hours later, and the Russians by that point knew good and damn well which area they were advancing in, because they let them know an offensive is happening in 48 hours, and the Russians, with their recon drones and also other recon abilities, were able to easily see the buildup in Zaporizhzhia and knew that that was the offensive and that was what was going to happen, and were pretty much able to reinforce and completely stop that offensive before it actually broke any headway. That was one of the biggest blunders that he made. Like, if I had to blame anyone or anything for the failure of the 2023 summer offensive, it was him. Because if he had not made that statement, there may have been a chance the Russians just overlooked that there was an offensive happening. They did not know until that statement was made. And then they looked around, and then they went, oh, look, there's a notable buildup of troops here in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast. This is where the offensive is. Let's send some forces there. And they arrived just in time to really stop the offensive from making ground. That's one of the big things. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and the summer offensive of 2023 are the reasons why I just do not like the guy. Like those were two massive things. One, we covered the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant like it was gospel, and then it ended up being entirely untrue, which I feel like was a mark against our credibility because we trusted everything this guy said up to this point. And then secondly, in the same year, he ended up pretty much blowing the cover on the Zaporizhzhia offensive and pretty much screwed it over, in my opinion. That's my take. That's why I generally actually would be in the 19% saying he's not good for the position, and I think Zelenskyy should see about sending him into a different agency or a different bureau or a different department, because I'm sure he's good at something, but someone else needs to be the director of intelligence, in my opinion. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the third to last question of the night.
All right, and this question is going to go to Pale Rider, who says, now what will Germany do now that the U.S. has given Ukraine permission to use the long-range ATACMS inside of Russia? Will Germany now allow Ukraine to use the Taurus missiles?
We've actually heard that the Germans are not going to be giving them Taurus missiles. I don't know if that was like a response to Zelenskyy having a public statement of displeasure against Scholz. I don't know what that was, but they said actually it was like, I believe 2 days ago, they were not going to be giving them Taurus missiles. So I don't think it's going to...
Also unfortunate, not only did they say they weren't giving them Taurus missiles, but Scholz went out of his way to say something wild about it too. He was like, we won't give them Taurus missiles, something to the effect of over my dead body or something like that. It was some wild statement. I was shocked at myself. I was like, why would he make a statement that severe about it? I don't understand.
Yeah, it was goofy what the Germans did with that, because that doesn't make any sense in anyone's strategic interests. But still, I think it's going to have no impact on the Germans because they're not even giving anything to them at this point for it to matter. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And we are on to the second to last question of the night.
All right, and this question right here is going to go to, let's see here, Bernard Rubin, who said, with the U.S. finally allowing the Ukrainians their deep strike missiles, what are some of the likely targets?
There are a lot of likely targets, not to list off any specific ones, but just general targets of interest. Airfields will always be a priority target. Rail yards will also be a pretty significant target as well. And let me show you one of the bigger ones here inside of Kursk. There is one. I'm blind and I got to find it. Here we go. This rail yard right here would be a target. I don't really know if the Ukrainians would want to hit it, though, because it's near an active railway station, which could cause a decent amount of civilian casualties. So they might try and avoid the rail yards in populated areas, which also makes logistics a lot more difficult, to be entirely honest with y'all, because, well, striking at their logistics, because pretty much every single rail yard in the Soviet Union or the former Soviet Union is in the middle of a populated area. Sometimes in America, it's different, because of the whole NIMBY thing of not in my backyard, so people just want the rail yards elsewhere. And because of that, you'll see, like, for example, in Birmingham, the rail yards are in literally the middle of nowhere, like the Norris Yard here near Leeds, or actually Irondale specifically. It's near Irondale town, but it's generally off in the woods still, where it's not really bothering anyone. Or in some instances, other yards are built into the poorer areas of town, like northern Birmingham, where there's also the CSX yard. I forgot the name of this one. And then the BNSF yard is also over here in the middle of the industrial area, near to US Steel, which is just down here. And also this major quarry, which is... Wait, hang on. That's not the major quarry. There is a major quarry around here. Yeah, right here. There we go. That's it right there. But it's near a major quarry or some industrial area, and then the city grew up around it. That's kind of how rail yards work in America. So in America, if we were at war and the Russians wanted to strike our rail yards, generally they're in areas that are isolated enough that shrapnel wouldn't be hitting residential areas. But in a place like Russia or in the Soviet Union, where not in my backyard wasn't really a concern, and the Russian government said, screw your backyard, it doesn't really pan out the same, because there's literally houses and other sorts of inhabited buildings and also railroad stations in the dead center of the rail yard. So it makes it very hard to hit these targets without causing possibly decent civilian casualties. So those could possibly be targets, but there is a decent chance that there will be civilian casualties. Another target would be major logistics hubs. These would be buildings that the Ukrainians, through their intelligence sources, figure out are being used as stockpiles for the Russian military. There are also mega ammunition bases that exist throughout all of Western Russia that could be targeted. These right here are prime examples. This is an ammunition yard along with this little area over here. They actually have a lot of them in the Bryansk Oblast. Here's another one just for y'all to see. This is another ammunition dump. They also have, let's see, another one. There's a fairly big one down here somewhere. I'm not sure if I don't think they've actually hit it yet. And it could be a possible target of interest. And also command hubs will be a priority target as well. So the Southern Military District the command headquarters in Rostov-on-Don would actually be a target for a Ukrainian strike, because most Russian commanders would be in that building generally 24/7, or at least some high officials, and if they got hit and killed, that would be a pretty big loss for the Russian command structure, and then they'd also be striking other headquarters that may be inside of Russia within that area as well. So generally, their supplies, their assets, such as aircraft, the Navy also would be a target in Novorossiysk. That's another big one that would be targeted in Stricken as well, and then anything to do with command and communications would also be targeted as well. We have to remember that these missiles are not going to be hitting infantry or anything like that, or just a random tank like 300 miles inside of Russia, because that doesn't really make the strike worthwhile. These are several $1 million missiles. The Storm Shadow and the Scalp EGs are around 3 to 3.5 million, and ATACMS is around $1 million apiece. So hitting one of those tanks with an ATACMS doesn't really make any sense. It's not really a return on investment. A return on investment would be to hit major supply dumps, rail yards, airfields, naval yards, or a communications center, because that would actually cause very costly effects to the Russian Federation and really screw them over, at least in that one aspect. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And Matthew, I understand that we are on to the final question of the night. And so, who is the lucky last person to throw in the lucky last question of the night?
All right, so that viewer is going to be Can't Get Right. And I took this question at the risk of being called a nuclear alarmist, but we're going to answer this question anyway because we're not trying to be alarmist whatsoever. But the question, it says, if Putin uses nukes, depending on the wind, the fallout will go east, covering parts of Russia and eventually China. And do you agree this would be a huge mistake for Putin?
That is considering if there would be fallout. And in some instances, there is none, or a very, very minuscule amount. Usually in the modern day, we actually try and mitigate fallout, at least in everyone's national nuclear strategies, because we understand that fallout would be devastating. And generally, while people understand that nuclear weapons are the most devastating weapon ever produced, people generally don't want to create fallout. And not only that, the way that fallout is created and the way that the bomb is used at that point actually creates less damage to the actual target. So to explain how fallout is created when a nuclear bomb or an atomic bomb hits the surface of the earth and explodes, or explodes very, very close above the ground, like maybe 50 feet or lower. That usually creates fallout because the nuclear bomb will explode pretty much directly above the ground, and the thermal pressures along with the force pretty much atomizes a good amount of the soil below the explosion and connects it to the irradiated particles that were created as a byproduct of the nuclear explosion. The thermal event that happens from a nuclear explosion creates a massive mushroom cloud, which sends all of these irradiated dust particles up into the sky, creating the mushroom cloud that many people will, of course, commonly know and see from the movies. And then all of that dust gets carried by the winds and deposited over a large area, creating an irradiated landscape for several weeks or even longer than that in some instances, although the half-life of uranium-235 at that point is around 2 to 3 weeks. So generally, most of the effects dissipated after 2 to 3 weeks. But nevertheless, that is a very ineffective way to use a nuclear weapon. We actually found out sometime earlier on in the late 50s and early 60s that airbursting them is a lot more effective. An airburst is when a nuclear bomb explodes overhead at a higher altitude. So about a couple of thousand feet up, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 feet up. But in the instance of a tactical nuclear weapon being fired onto Ukraine, it would actually be a bit lower because the explosive radius of a tactical nuke is not as big as the strategic ones that would be fired the United States. And so for this reason, the damage is actually a lot more significant because a lot of the energy isn't being imparted directly below it into the ground and creating that fallout cloud that would travel on due to the winds. It generally is exerting all of its energy into a perfect spherical area up in literally every direction, but also at the targets on the ground. And usually that is a better way to inflict damage and casualties. Like what's very interesting about this kind of a theory or this kind of a practice of using nuclear weapons, that let's say hypothetically, just to pick a city. Actually, we'll pick a city that's not an American city, just so that we were not talking about Americans getting hit. We'll talk about the Russians. So let's say that a nuclear bomb drops right in the middle of Moscow. A ground impact, or a direct ground impact, would actually cause a lot less casualties, although it would be far more destructive in a much smaller area. A airburst impact over Moscow would actually create far more casualties, much more damage over a wider area, but would mitigate the amount of fallout. And generally what we believe is that while the Russians would be using tactical nuclear weapons, they would most likely configure them to explode in an airburst form, meaning that there wouldn't really be a lot of radiation from those explosions, except for directly below the explosion in a very small area, but it would still cause a lot more damage to the Ukrainian forces than a ground burst would have. And so for this reason, radiation isn't that great of a concern. Also, Russia would have a fallout issue. If they did do ground bursts with strategic-sized nuclear weapons, there would be a decent amount of fallout that would cross across the Russian border and start to settle in the Bryansk, Kaluga, Tula, Oryol, Kursk, Lipetsk, Voronezh, and Belgorod oblasts. But generally, it wouldn't go much farther than that, because fallout doesn't travel all the way around the world. It just travels until the dust settles back down to the ground, which generally, depending on the size, the fallout cloud can extend about 50 to 250 miles away from the epicenter of the explosion. So China, being several thousand miles away, would never be able to feel any of the effects of that fallout because the fallout isn't that severe. And that's also another thing that's misunderstood about atomic or nuclear energy, is that a nuclear reactor having a meltdown and a nuclear bomb exploding are actually very different in the amount of radioactive output that they make. Chernobyl, as far as radiation damage or radiological damage, was far more extensive than that of any nuclear bomb that's ever been blown up, even if it was a ground impact that created fallout. Because the Chernobyl nuclear reactor was, well, to explain it, the radiation released by a nuclear bomb is instantaneous pretty much within the first second that the actual what in the world is it called, Matthew, in a nuclear bomb? It's the detonator, or it's the bullet.
The catalyst you're talking about?
Yeah, the catalyst. Once the catalyst is set off, most of the radiation is emitted by the nuclear weapon within less than a second, far less than that actually, and then it has a half-life of about 2.5 weeks or so, and then it dies off. And a nuclear reactor, like the one at Chernobyl, or the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, when that reactor melted down and exploded, it was like a nuclear bomb's worth of radiation that would be exuded by a nuclear bomb when it exploded in a second, happening every single second. So the radiological damage was much more significant, and because of the sheer volume of radiological mass, it traveled a lot farther as well, and it also affected a wider area a lot more significantly, and also was a lot more longer lasting, considering that the half-life of this stuff, apparently inside of a nuclear reactor, is a lot longer than it would have been inside of a nuclear bomb. And so that's generally why radioactive fallout isn't really that big of a concern in the modern day in nuclear warfare, because it would have to be caused by direct ground impacts. And direct ground impacts, at least in modern nuclear warfare, would very rarely, if ever, happen. The only time that they would happen, to give an example here, would be, for example, if the Russian Federation fired nuclear weapons here in the United States and ended up trying to hit some of the nuclear silos that we had out inside of places like Nebraska or Wyoming or Kansas or Colorado. Those would require direct ground impacts, because an airburst would not necessarily completely knock out those bunkers. So the Russians actually have those nuclear weapons to where they slam directly on top of the bunker and they conduct a ground impact, because of course hitting the bunker directly with a nuclear weapon will assuredly destroy it completely. So that's actually something really interesting that we know, is that if a nuclear war happened, the worst place to be in America, believe it or not, it would not be the East Coast or the West Coast where most of the population centers are. It actually would be in the middle of the West in the United States. It would truly be an irradiated hellscape for weeks, if not maybe a month or two after the nuclear war had occurred, because most of those impacts would have been ground impacts and not airbursts. So I hope that does explain a lot of that fairly well, or at least how nuclear war would work in the modern day, and that's why radiation wouldn't be that much of a concern for the Russians when using tactical nuclear weapons. If they blew up a nuclear power plant, though, and it went into a meltdown, that would be a serious concern for them, because those eastern winds would carry a lot of radiation over a large area of eastern Russia, all the way up until the Ural Mountains, and then the Ural Mountains, because of how high they are, would usually catch most of the radioactive fallout and pretty much act as a barrier for Asia, making sure that very little of it made it across the Ural mountain range. But with that, I hope that does answer that question well. A very interesting last question, by the way, to talk a little bit more about nuclear warfare. But with that, we have reached the end of tonight's stream. I've got to thank each and every single one of y'all so much once again for watching. If y'all have enjoyed tonight, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We had a peak of 11.3 thousand people here tonight, and 66,000 people have watched this stream before it ended. Not only that, we were able to raise $4,028 for Ukraine. And so with that, thank you all
Tremendous.
so much. Tremendous. Real trap shit. And let's see, walk with your boys. But still, we will see you all on Tuesday. I will actually see y'all tomorrow, hopefully, if there's enough news to make for a short war video. But we will see y'all on Tuesday for day 1000 of the war. Make sure to be here, because it's going to be a pretty big day, and y'all are going to be able to hear that fresh new track that the LSA has made from scratch. And so with that, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, and long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die.
And with that, folks, thank you all once again for watching and joining us tonight on another Sunday Night Fundraiser stream. And also, thank you all very much for helping us to reach the $4,000, which is well above the $3,000 goal. And we really do appreciate that indeed. And also, be sure to join us again on Tuesday night, that is. Tomorrow is Monday, the day off. So there will be a short war video coming out tomorrow if there's enough news to cover. And I think you'll be hearing from the Enforcer tomorrow, probably most likely, because it's his day. So with that, thank you all for watching. Slava Ukraine, Hero Slava. Get some rest and good night.
pissed.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.